His dad died.
So what I was going to do
Yeah.
no mai, haere mai te komiti tai au o hapore hoke, which means basically welcome to the Environmental and Community Committee. Also, whakalawhalai atu because of New Air Language Week. Look, I just want to again welcome everybody, and look, there's some health and safety stuff, and I need to point this out to you. One, it's on the screen up here. Also, there's something in the hallway around health and safety. But I will tell you, however, that if you want to go to the toilets, if you go through the front door there, left is the men, right is the women. Also, if there is a fire alarm, please do not use the lifts. People over 65 first, followed by the chair, followed by our two ladies over here, Tam and Maya, and then the rest of you can follow us, and we just need to listen to the wardens, and we'll meet at Aotea Square. So that's the health and safety. Look, in regards to the pages, if you have a look through the agenda to the members of the committee, if you have a look through the agenda, you'll see some of the blank pages, and the reason it's blank is because of the light blue colour that we used, so when it went to the printers late, it just wasn't dark enough, so that's why you've got all the patches in there. Item 15, and hopefully with the agreement of the committee, item 15 around the UNESCO Creative Cities Network and the update presentation. At 11:30, we've asked the people from the music industry plus our staff to be here at 11:30. When they do arrive as a result of the music industry people that we have, I will then finish the agenda item we will be on. I will finish that, and then I will then get item 15 on there. Hopefully we will get to 11:30 and at item 15 without moving the agenda around. There's also 2 governing body workshops to be held at the conclusion of this particular meeting. So the sooner the better in regards to getting to the GB workshops.
Just, eh? Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, no, we've got Councillor Fletcher over there, so she's in the room. Yeah. She's in the house like Elvis. So look, I'm going to move to our apologies. So we've got the apologies, you can read them up there. But also I just want to acknowledge the apologies for member Renata Blair for his absence, and I want to invite member Brown to say a little mihi in regards to his absence. Tēnā koe matua.
Tēnā koe te ia mana o tātou te committee nei. Tuatahi me mihi ki te atua nana nei ngā me katoa. E tawhare e tū nei te papa i waho i takoto mai nei tēnā kaurua, tēnā koutou e taonga kei waho o koutou manaakitanga o tātou. Kātou e te mihi aroha ia o mātou hoa mahi o ta rangatira Renata, tana pāpa e takoto mai nei, e mate nei o te rā hui anō. Anei mātou e te committee e te mihi aroha, koutou nei Renata, e te whānui tonu, e te whānau pani, tūkaha, tūmaia, tūmanawa nui. O reira, ai ta rangatira, koutou katoa, anei mātou e te committee, tū atu e te mihi aroha o rātou nei, anei mātou e te puku e te kaumihiro o Tāmaki Makaurau, Tāmaki Heringa ki ngā waka, Tāmaki whānui tonu katoa. O reira, ai ta rangatira, moi mai, moi mai, moi mai, ka rongo koe te karango o te atua, o reira haere, haere, haere atu rā. Hui anō, ka haere koe e rongo e te āhuatanga o te rerenga wairu o tātou e ngā tūpuna, no reire e te pāpā, haere, haere, haere atu rā. O reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, can we stand for a minute of silence because Renata, member Blair lost his father and his service is today.
11 o'clock.
And he is a member of our committee, so we just have a minute silence, that'd be great. Kia ora nā. Kapai, kia ora nā, thank you. Item 2, ngā mihi ki a koe matua. Item 2 is declaration of interest. Now, just for me in regards to our agenda item
10.
number 9. Oh, sorry, I've just been corrected here too, and my apologies. Can we, I'll move the apology second,
second.
please. Second is Councillor Simpson. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Tam. Just declaration of interest, number 9. I'm just declaring the fact that I am a landlord. And, but for me, this is a regional approach in regard to the submission. But I just wanted to put it out there and people know. Anybody else? No, thank you. Confirmation of minutes. I'll move the confirmation of the minutes. Second, Councillor Watson. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Petitions, there were no petitions. Public input, there's no public input. I now come through to agenda 6, which is local board input. And there's 3 local board members who are here. And Greg, I'll get to... Lisa, did you want to go first? Yeah, so Chair Greg, is it okay if the local board member Lisa goes through because she's down also with a hearing that's downstairs? Is that okay?
Fine, and Shane's speaking to the same thing.
Yeah, and then if Shane could follow? Okay, thank you. Kia ora, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and thanks, Greg, for letting me just barge in quickly. Apologies from our chair. She's at the hospital with her mother, so we weren't sure if anyone from Upper Harbour would be here to speak to the agenda item today, but because I'm at a hearing deliberations meeting downstairs, I couldn't resist the opportunity to hear my own voice just one more time in this room. Speaking to item 8, you'll see attached on your agenda page, I can't read the page numbers, attachment B, you'll see Upper Harbour's resolutions on this matter. You will see very clearly that, with all due respect to the work that the officers have done, we don't agree with their findings, and we have some quite serious concerns about what the impact of this report is on our One Local initiative, which is for indoor court provision in the northwest in the Whenuapai area. We believe there's enough evidence from our sporting codes to justify our OLI, or we wouldn't have gone through the process that we did. And we believe that the way the data has been cut and pasted to create a new area which doesn't relate to any particular local board area, any particular sporting sub-regional organisation area, or any other code areas, has meant that the data doesn't support the evidence that we believe is out there. So it's a part of our local board area, it's a part of Rodney, it's a part of Henderson Massey, it is a part of Sport Waitakere, it's a part of Harbour Sport, and it's not to criticise, but we've got some neighbouring impacts that would distort the data, and the census data is from 2013, which we know is significantly out of date, particularly for Upper Harbour, which is our fastest growing area in the country. So all I'm asking is that when you give consideration to accepting and adopting the officer's recommendation, that you consider adding in a review clause when the census data is available. You'll see from our resolutions that when we progress to the business case, we're strongly supportive of evidence-based allocation of council money because we know money is tight. It's a scarce resource. We want to make good decisions with it. And unfortunately, this report is pushing us into a more political advocacy role than we would prefer. We would prefer, as a local board, to use data to support good business cases for our projects to serve our community. And unfortunately, this report is contrary to what we're hearing from our community and from our sports groups. So I'd ask you to cast your eye over our resolutions, give some thought about updating it when we've got new census information, and we look forward to working with the officers to come up with a business case that supports our Ollie. And thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora. I'm just going to open up and see if there's any questions. If not, yeah. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Lisa. Just in terms of your Ollie, did the board sought any clarification as to how your desires with your Ollie overrides even a stance they might take, given that the Ollies are your choice? You've determined that as a priority. Has there been any sort of clarification of that?
I think it would be fair to say that there's a difference of opinion between policy and operations, and it's not just in this area of council, but in particular what we're finding is that from a policy perspective there's a piece of work, and from an operations department there's a different piece of work, and they don't quite overlap. So the Ollie was looked at with an Upper Harbour lens, and this piece of work is a bit of Upper Harbour and a bit of Rodney and a bit of Henderson Massey, because it's trying to serve a different policy objective. I totally understand that, it just doesn't help us.
Yeah. The system hasn't helped.
Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. Lisa, so what did you base your Ollie on then if the data was not available? What was it, just perceptions in the area and local input?
No, years of advocacy from our regional sports organisation, the active submission to the long-term plan, which took a regional view. We've also had, if you recall, I came and begged for support for what was the Sovereign Yachts building, but then became the YDL building, and we hoped that Panuku could allow us to use money to repurpose it as a community sports facility. We did a needs analysis at that time and identified that basketball, volleyball, gymnastics, trampolining, all of which had a space shortfall, would have jumped at the chance, sorry for the pun. But so yes, we did have some analysis of actual needs that we believed justified our Ollie. It wasn't just a whim. So we've had individual members of the community talk to us, we've had sporting codes, and we've had the sub-regional sports organisation support our needs, our project.
Our Ollie.
Thanks.
If there's no further questions, Councillors Watson and Walker, move in second.
Yep.
Okay, just to thank Lisa, so I'll thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you,
been
have a
moved and
good day.
seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Tēnā koe te rangatira. Second item is the chair. Henderson Massey, all yours.
Kia ora, whakalofalahi atu councillors, and thank you, Mr. Chair. We're wanting to speak broadly in favour of item 8, which is the investigation of the Northwest Community Provision. Particularly for the aquatic provision side of things. It's been no secret, it's been our Ollie for several years that we desperately need a pool to serve the northwest of this city. And we believe that this investigation really does make that case out very well. I do want to draw councillors' attention to the omission of the Royal Heights census area unit, so it's otherwise known as Massey East. So if you can see it on the map, it's kind of a bulbous peninsula-like bit. Now that is one of the poorest communities in all of Auckland, and we did explain to staff several times that that community does not access West Wave, and it is much more appropriate for that community to be included within subcatchment 3. So the point of all of that is that we feel that the need is even greater than the report actually states, simply because of that omission. We have asked, and we have had an agreement that that is included in the business case for the pool later. So not all is lost. I'm just asking councillors that when you're reading this report, you sort of add that in. But otherwise, we support it. And just to speak to Chair White, we'd support a review clause as well, just given that 2013 census data is quite out of date. But yeah, we thank you for this opportunity, and I'd be delighted if there's any questions.
Whakawelahi. Just thank you. Questions? If not, Councillor,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Cooper.
Thanks for coming in, Chair Shane. Just in terms of the comments from Lisa White around the indoor court facility stuff. So it says in the report around, oh, well, we'll just have to see how the multi-purpose community facility goes. Do you see that the library and community centre is like a basketball space, an indoor court space for sports?
No.
That's what that intimates there. I didn't think so, yeah.
No, so the library and the community centre sort of combined space that's being built right now in the northwest is designed for essentially a community centre and a library mashed into one.
Yeah.
So you can't play basketball around books.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I thought. So I think
You can, but it's not recommended.
Yeah,
No,
so
that's
that's what I wanted to understand. That's not your understanding or the board's understanding or my understanding.
That's right.
That would be a proxy for indoor court space. Thank you.
Okay, so there's no further questions. Councillor Cooper, you want to move, and
Yes, I
Councillor
would.
Collins will second the presentation. I'll move that. Sorry, it's been moved. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Thank you very much.
Shane. Thank you. Look, just before we move on to the Chair of Waitakere Rangers, just to let you know, in item 16, there is a reference there to the Waitakere Rangers program, and there's 140 pages. So just to let you know before our Chair comes up, and so, Local Board Chair, Waitakere Rangers, tēnā koe matua.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, and to members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and I wanted to make a very quick comment about item 13, which relates to water quality, and a few comments about item 14, which relates to the natural environment targeted rate. Just in relation to water quality, I note that the Waitakere Rangers septic tank and on-site water program will involve a review of the legacy pump-out service, which has operated in the area for many years. It's true that water quality in the lagoons out west is not getting better, and in fact they may be getting worse. But the solution may be for the existing service to be retained but improved rather than do away with it. Specifically, and this is probably a gross simplification, but the problem seems to be that not all systems are certified or inspected, and that ones that are inspected and certified, the dispersal field is not inspected. And so it may be that same scheme, enhanced certification, making sure that individuals' systems are up to scratch may be the solution rather than doing away with a system that is quite popular out west. In relation to item 14, which is the natural environment targeted rate, and council's in the very important process of starting to spend the money that's going to be collected. Obviously, out west we have a deep interest in Kari dieback. I regret to inform you all, but our successors in 30 years' time are probably going to be discussing the issue. It's not going to go away very quickly. The local board was fully supportive of the rate. We thought it was a brave decision. We were actually happy to urge council to be even braver and to fully fund the pest management plan. We haven't, council didn't quite get there, but we're 80% funded, so that is good. A couple of comments. Firstly, the report talks about local tracks, and I believe that urgent work is needed on that. As an example, in Titirangi, which has a large amount of Kari dieback, the zigzag track which runs through Regional Park has been closed and it's being upgraded. There are a number of smaller local tracks that go through local parks which remain open. As an example, there are two, Mahoi and Bill Hairsnape, which go through significant Kari stands, and it is an area with significant infection. So if we want to get on top of the problem and quarantine it, we need to urgently address local tracks as well as tracks through Regional Park. We agree that the approach to Kari dieback across the local network is urgently needed, and it could be that a starting point should be for local tracks that the principles of the Rahui are respected, that we close everything and only open it up when everyone is satisfied that the tracks are safe. I note paragraph 29, page 171, there's a proposal for a slowdown in the spend over the first year. My concern is that this is the time when the spend is most important, because we're dealing with a pathogen, we're dealing with a quarantine situation. We have large areas where the pathogen has been established, and I would suggest that right now is the time that the work needs to be done. So can I urge Council, if at all possible, to find any ways not to delay the rollout of the program. The last comment I'd like to make concerns the large area of private land which is adjacent to the regional park out west. This is land which is bush covered and has a significant number of kauri as well, and I would suggest there's an urgent need to ensure that that local landowners are resourced properly, and I would appreciate at some stage further information about this aspect of the program and how assistance to local landowners could be accelerated. So again, just going back to the general principle, we are dealing with a crisis. We're dealing with the quarantining and treatment of a pathogen. We're dealing with treatment of ill trees, and it's urgent that the work happens sooner rather than later. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Kia ora. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Greg, the septic tank clean-out in the legacy Waitaka area, were the tanks actually pumped out every 3 years at ratepayers' expense, or was just the inspections done and then privately people were forced to do it?
There's a special local targeted rate which paid for the pump out, covered roughly about half of all septic tanks in the area. It depended on their age and the type of tank that it was.
And that
So
target rate doesn't exist anymore?
It's still there, but the proposal is to do away with it. It's a good old socialised system of making sure that everyone had their tanks pumped out fairly regularly.
Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Greg, for coming in. I mean, the proposal that we adopted was to go out and consult about this next year during the annual plan round. Because it's a targeted rate, we need to consult on it. And so I know there's been some talk with the local board and sort of campaigning a bit against it at the moment. So do you think the compromise here is to offer some more options in that consultation rather than a stop or start type of option? You've talked about some options. Because I think it's important to, I do think it's important for us to consult, because we can have anecdotal, but we need to get some ground truthing from the community. Do you think we're better to go out with something a bit more nuanced?
Yes, and I think that we need to look at all sorts of different options. So obviously, if it's not working, then we need to think about it, either getting rid of it or changing it.
Yeah, because it's
I'd
clearly
like to
not
think
working.
that it does have some benefits, and that with some changes we can make it work better.
Okay. Oh, well, hopefully we can work, when we develop this consultation, Mr. Chair, work with the local board to develop something a bit less black and white.
Okay then.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Sure. Has the local board advocated for ensuring that all the septic tanks have got biofilters?
Not that I can think of, no, but we've done some work in the area. We've commissioned a big blue report which goes into water quality out west. There has been work that Eco Matters Trust have been doing by way of a survey of tank owners to try and assess which tanks are working properly and which aren't. There's privacy issues within moving on to enforcement from the data that they collect, but all options are being looked at.
So that includes biofilters?
I'm not on top of the detail. I'm sure that Eco Matters have been talking about those options.
It's okay. It's simple, it's cheap, and deals with most of the problems. So
Yeah,
I just
bottom
don't
line-
know why we don't enforce it.
Our bottom line should be that the lagoon's water quality should improve, so we need to do whatever we can for that to happen.
Okay.
Okay. No further questions. Councillor Cooper, if you want to move, and I'll second. So I'll put the recommendation to thank the chair. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Item 7, extraordinary business, there's none. Item 8. I'm going to move in the first instance with this item. Second, for discussion, Councillor Simpson. And I just want to welcome everybody and all yours.
Morning, councillors. I'm Liz Civil, I'm the Manager of Community Policy, and alongside me is Katarana Maki, the GM of our department, and Antonia Butler in my team. So Antonia is going to introduce this item as she's done the work in this case, and take you through a very brief presentation of the key findings from this work.
Thank you. This report seeks that the committee agree to the findings of the Northwest Community Facility Provision Investigation. In a bit of background, in 2015, the governing body approved the Community Facilities Network Plan and its associated action plan. The action plan identified a priority action in relation to a gap in aquatic provision across Auckland's northwest. The study area includes parts of the Rodney Local Board, parts of the Upper Harbour Local Board, and parts of the Henderson-Massey Local Board, where the gap was most apparent. Because of the level of growth anticipated across this area, the investigation was expanded to cover the full scope of the Community Facilities Network Plan, which includes, as well as aquatic, leisure and recreation, libraries, community centres and halls, arts and culture facilities, and venues for hire. The purpose of the investigation was to determine if there are current gaps in provision, and if there are likely to be future gaps, and when and where these may occur. In delivery of this work, we workshopped twice with each of the local boards that were in the study area, and also reported our findings to them in September prior to coming to committee. The investigation found that, as you can see up in the slide, that existing provision at the moment is sufficient to support current demand. However, growth across the area is likely to put pressure on existing facilities and neighbouring facilities, which will create a new demand for facilities across the area. There is some capacity in existing facilities, particularly in venues for hire and community spaces. Across the study area, library usage and recreation and leisure usage is increasing. However, increased provision in aquatic and leisure and recreation facilities was a common theme from the social research and community engagement that has occurred across the area. As the population grows and develops, the community profile of that area is changing. There is an aging baseline population. However, as development occurs, it is bringing in younger working people and families. Ethnic diversity is also changing across the study area, which is likely to bring in demand for new service types. There is also disparity across the Northwest study area. Some rural areas, such as the Upper Rodney area and Kumeu, are geographically isolated and have limited access to community spaces and facilities. There is also socioeconomic disparity across the area. While much of it is relatively affluent, the more urban areas of Westgate and Massey have high levels of deprivation. This socioeconomic deprivation is linked to lower levels of participation. We could go to the next slide. The gap analysis that was undertaken for the study area found the following: that for aquatic, there is a requirement for aquatic provision from 2026. The Westgate and Massey area, which is the orange area at the bottom of the study area, was identified as the optimal location for aquatic provision because the majority of the people in the study area would be captured within a 5-kilometre catchment. This area also has the additional benefit of reaching residents in the lower area of the Henderson-Massey Local Board area that experience high levels of deprivation. So those people would also still be within the 5-kilometre catchment, enabling increased access. In relation to recreation and leisure, there is also a future requirement for additional recreation and leisure space across the study area. The investigation identified that the optimal locations for this was in the Kumeu-Huapai area by 2026, and then in the Henderson-Massey or Upper Harbour area by 2036.
Locating additional indoor courts in the Kumeu-Huapai area will address disparity in access to facilities due to the geographic isolation of this area. An additional recreation and leisure space in Henderson, Massey, or Upper Harbour in the future would provide increased local services in an area that has high population density for the future and a community profile that will align well with recreation and leisure facility users. In relation to arts, library, and community services, there is no requirement for additional space. There is, however, the need to address immediate condition issues at Kumeu Library, and if that library were to close, this would create a gap in the local network. Staff are reporting to the Rodney Local Board in November on options on how to address the immediate condition issues. There may also be a future need for community arts and community spaces and art space in Whenuapai from 2026 to address population, and also additional library, arts, and community space in Kumeu by 2036 to support population growth across that area. So following the gap analysis, the recommendations associated with this investigation are as follows. The next slide, please. That staff progress with the indicative business case for aquatic provision as approved through the long-term plan. That staff progress with the indicative business case for recreation and leisure space in Rodney as approved through the long-term plan. That we progress to the indicative business case for recreation and leisure space in Upper Harbour and Massey area as approved through the long-term plan. And finally, that we monitor population growth in Whenuapai and Kumeu and progress with an indicative business case when the population reaches approximately 10,000 people.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
That's all right. Katarina, Liz, any further comments? Questions only. Councillor Watson? And then
Thank
Councillor
you,
Simpson.
Mr Chair. I just wanted to pick up some of the points that the Upper Harbour Local Board had raised in terms of the study area there, and we saw the map, in particular the area that's just to the east of the Green High Bridge, which is, you know, quite a populous area and fast growing. They just have to come over the bridge. From my knowledge, quite a reasonable number of people head west rather than, you know, head to Albany. Could you just give me a response to that comment or observation of the board that really it should have perhaps been a slightly bigger area, or that might have come up with perhaps different findings?
Through the chair, the study area was determined because this was the strongest concentration of gap for aquatic provision. With Albany Pool, a lot of users travel that way or down through to the West Wave area. In relation to recreation and leisure provision, the data that we have suggests a split that people in the Whenuapai and Hobsonville area travel down to the Westgate, Massey area, although people on the other side of the bridge, while some travel down that way, it is a lower number of users. This study was designed to address the gap in local provision in relation to the Upper Harbour request is in relation to sub-regional provision. Now that work is intended to go ahead, but what we've been attempting to address here is the gap in local provision of a 5-kilometre catchment in relation to rec and leisure and aquatic.
Okay, thanks. The other point I just would bring up that they also mention, of course, is we've got the latest census data to come out. This is a, you know, incredibly fast-growing areas with huge development that's occurred and is continuing to occur. Obviously, there will be some sense in reviewing that data when it comes through, I would have thought.
Through the chair, yes, this report acknowledges the risk around population projections. In our analysis, we used the most recent data on population estimates and projections that were used for the LTP and also for the Auckland Plan. However, as new census material becomes available, that can be used in the indicative business case to reassess population numbers along with any new modelling associated with that.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Simpson and then Cooper.
My questions actually have been asked already by Councillor Watson. That's exactly my two questions, so thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Thanks. It's an absolutely chock-a-block report. It must have taken a long time and a lot of work's gone into it, so I do appreciate that. Having lived in this area for over 25 years and also grew up in my teens and went to Massey High School, so I'm just prefacing I do know the area and representing it in Waitakere City Council, is that we must include Massey East. If you look at that, that's much more isolated. Massey West, you can just go, whip down Triangle Road, whip down Donbuck and get to West Wave and places like that quite easily in the stadium. But Massey East is a whole different type of area and it should be included. And for example, within the last 2 years, we've had 190 homes built just on the old education site in Moya Road. So that's another, you know, how many families is that? And young families. So for me, we must include that. That bumps up that population just like that. And also, you know, we never thought we'd have Red Hills as well. I went to an announcement a couple of weeks ago there, and they're already building the houses there. And what surprises me in this is that we have 2 basketball courts, and that's a huge catchment. Massey is one of the largest suburbs in the country. It's over 40,000 people. It is split by the motorway, but the reality is it's a huge, and it's a very young suburb. A high Pacifica, it's the second highest Pacifica and second highest Māori population in Auckland after Manukau. So we have young populations and these kids love to play sports. So for me, only having 2 indoor courts is not sufficient, and what's happening now is even when you move out of, you know, take the library out of that current leisure centre, it has not got the configuration, it hasn't got the height to be converted to indoor courts, so we can't pin our hopes on that. We have Waitakere Stadium that has a bumping policy because it needs to run commercially as well, so they can be booked in there and they're gone within a moment, they can't play. And also people say you could use the netball courts. No, because we need to pay for a sprung floor in there. So in a really wide geographical radius, there's not much access. Brand new gym at Marina View School, but they don't open it up. You know, so I just really think we've got to rethink the indoor court provision. And it's such a wide catchment. Kids from Kumu come to play at Massey. You know, and I think that we've had an issue of, you know, so what I'm asking you, and that's my question, is will you reconsider that? Because I do think, you know, 2013 census is too small, is too far away to give a real picture of the growth and the need for indoor court provision. Thank you. That was my question. Will you do that for us?
Good answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yes, through the chair, the next stage of the indicative business case is that opportunity to retest the growth data as new information comes in, and if there is a significant difference, the implications of that will be assessed through the indicative business case phase.
Thank you.
That's my question. Okay.
Okay. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. I just had 2 questions. First question was just around the Rodney Local Board's comment in the report requesting that their One Local Board initiative for the indoor court provision was, that's in Huapai, and Kemu was kind of progressed as soon as possible. So just wondered if you could perhaps make a comment around the reassurance that we can give them around that, and then I do have a second unrelated question.
So the long-term plan agreed that the local board could have an indicative business case developed. It's actually all of your indicative business cases, because actually this is the committee that approves them. Local boards only actually get to endorse or support them. So that work has already started with them. We have been using this data as well. We've already had, I think it's 1 or 2 workshops with the Rodney Local Board. There are, you know, people are having to understand what an indicative business case is. So the first indicative business case we've done for community facilities was FO. So the organisation, the FO Aquatic, has changed its approach to how it assesses new investment. So this bunch will be the second tranche of indicative business cases that you will all consider.
Right, well, thank you for that. And through you, Mr Chair, the second question was just perhaps elaborating for the benefit of the other councillors and myself, with regard to the significant to do with the community library, what those significant condition issues are that might be forcing it to close and what needs to be addressed there, just so we've got a feel for the work that's required. Thank you.
Through the chair, the QMU library suffers condition issues in association with weather tightness, which has led to dampness and leaking into the subfloor and through the ceiling. So staff across council have been working to look at options on how to best address these condition issues. We provided a workshop to the local board in September, and we will follow up with them with a report in November outlining the variable options for their consideration on how we can most quickly and efficiently address those weather tightness issues.
Okay, very good. Very good. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Clough, I think you might be the last in regards to questions.
Yep. Can you just give us an update on I think it's the QMU Squash Club and their the Rodney Board's intention to try and fast track some mutual recreation space with the Squash Club. Has anything happened there? I think it was their Ollie actually.
Yeah. Through the chair, I cannot confirm the status of that. I know that some of that work was investigated in the needs assessment that was done in the development of the Rodney Local Board Ollie, although any options around partnerships or co-delivery of facilities would be investigated through the indicative business case phase as potential options. So the current status, I'm sorry, I cannot tell you.
Okay, so coming up in the next month or two, there'll have to be a status report on all the Ollies anyway. That might be obviously one that we need to make sure it hasn't fallen flat on its face.
So the Ollies are, the indicative business case is progressing, but our ability to tell you here today how that partnership may or may not be going, we're unable to do that.
All good. Cool. No further questions? Any comments? If there's no comments, I just wanted to point out to everybody here is that you see in red recommendation E. Councillor Watson sort of took on board, as all of us did, around the input from our local boards, and our Chief of Operations spoke to his staff and also ended up agreeing with Councillor Watson and Simpson and myself in regards to putting E in there. Yeah, but I mean, we've agreed to incorporate it into the recommendations, so there's no need to get it moved in second.
Should that be facility provisions, plural?
Provisions?
No, it's provision.
Provisions,
It's a
provisions
provision.
plural.
It's an A provision
Provisions, plural.
of lots of
It's
stuff.
either a provision, but these are multiple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an overarching.
Contention is
all the
plural.
stuff inside.
Okay.
The intention of plural.
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Fletcher.
Provisions.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I endorse the E that you're putting up and incorporating into the recommendations. But I wonder whether you need it to be specific to the northwest. We've got areas across Auckland that are where the census data is completely out of date in terms of populations, and I think that you might just put a full stop after community facility provisions, plural. I'm hoping that our officers are watching the data closely. So while I want to see that data being available in the northwest, I also want to see it being available in all of the considerations that our officers are looking at in community facilities. So I would ask that you delete the in the northwest and just put a full stop after provisions.
This
Point of
report
order,
is
Mr. Chair.
about the
This is,
Northwest.
this item is
No,
about the
look, yeah,
northwest.
and I'm just saying that, look, it's taken on board in regards to the data that's coming up across the region, but in regards to this particular item, I would rather keep it at northwest in regards to this particular item. Kataraina ended up sort of nodding with the fact that the census may have an effect across the whole region, but in regards to this particular item, I will leave it at northwest, and if that's okay with Councillor Simpson, we can then put the recommendation. But it's been taken on board.
Thank you for your clarification,
Yeah.
but I take comfort from the fact that the officers, I just felt it was superfluous because the item is about the northwest, so it's very specific to the northwest, and whether you needed to put it again, it's neither here nor there, but it will be interesting that the officers are following this closely.
So,
The data from census will be very interesting for all our growth models, but particularly for the community facilities network plan and how that as a whole plan might need to be impacted. So we'll read that as community facility provisions in the northwest and for the community facility network plan.
Thank you.
did you want to put that? Okay then. So look, I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, ladies. Item 9. And that's a draft submission on the Residential Tenancies Act. And Kimberly and Debbie. And I've spoken to both ladies earlier, so the sooner we can get this item completed, the better. Okay, excuse me. So, I'm going to move the recommendation. Second.
I'll second.
Deputy Mayor. And, ladies, I'll leave it to you in regards to the PowerPoint. Tēnā korua. Yeah,
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Debbie Edwards, Senior Policy Manager in Community and Social Policy. I'll just introduce Kimberly Howell, who's drafted this submission, just to do a quick little introduction for you.
Thank you. Kia ora, Kimberly.
Okay, so I'll take the submission as read and briefly cover the purpose, why Auckland Council is making this submission, and how the submission was developed. Okay, so the purpose of the reform of the Residential Tenancies Act is really an opportunity for the regulation to catch up with the changes in the rental market, which has happened fairly recently. So Auckland Council is making a submission to this reform because the intent really aligns with the Auckland Plan 2050 Homes and Places chapter. This was quite a compact process due to timelines, but the elected members had the opportunity to provide a comment on a draft submission and attend a drop-in session as well. A draft submission was circulated to elected members for comment and refined based on the feedback received from elected members and also from internal staff and written feedback as well. And it still reflects the broad position which was circulated. Thank you.
There you go, short and sweet. Thank you, ladies. Questions? I think it's straightforward, but Councillor Collins and then Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions. I note that the submission supports going from 42 days to 90 days for landlords to advise the tenants that they might be coming back or to move on. Do you consider that bold enough? I know that the government's position, or at least the paper, is asking for that period, but is that bold enough, granted the security that a lot of renters don't have?
So that is quite a big question. There is a balancing between landlord and tenant. So under most circumstances, landlords have to give 90 days notice anyway. So the 42 days was really around where the landlord would want the premise back for sale, or if a family member was to move in. So it was bringing the 42 days in line with 90 days with all other, all other. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. One question offline. The other question I wanted to ask was, which I don't think is covered probably in the whole proposal, was the minimum term of a rent. I know that in Germany, the rental is for 2 years, that's the minimum term, or in some places in Germany for 4 years. I was wondering if that, I know that might not be make up part of the document the government's got out, but have we given any consideration to that?
No, so there isn't consideration of longer term like in other OECDs, but we have kind of made the statement that security of tenure is important.
Yeah, cool. But Chair, just maybe a question to you for reflection of the committee is for it somehow to have some thinking around that. I know it's probably not cased here because of what the government's asking for feedback on, but I think it's definitely something that we should consider. Thanks, Chair.
Definitely, and I think once the submission's gone in, will there then be something coming back to us and we'll be doing this?
Yeah.
So then, Councillor Collins, that may be the opportunity when it comes through to then have an input in regards to the length of tenancy.
Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Simpson.
Yes, my question is this going to put residential tenancy terms and conditions on a similar term for what's the standard in homes to what Housing New Zealand has for their tenants? In other words, for all the things that we're asking, for want of a better word, private landlords to do, are we going to make sure that that's kind of a same standard across the board, or are we asking for a higher standard from another type of tenant?
Yeah, so I know Housing New Zealand are currently in looking at their own rental properties, particularly around kind of pet ownership and their eviction terms, but I'm not completely across what Housing New Zealand are looking at, but they are looking to bring to upgrade their tenancies as well.
So I suppose, Mr. Chairman, that's my concern. I mean, I don't think that what's in here is bad at all, but I think that there shouldn't be one standard for some sort of tenants, and one standard for some other type of tenants. So I was interested in how they compared.
Yeah.
Sorry, through the chair,
I just don't know. I'm just asking that question.
Yeah. I'll just.
Through the chair, I understand that it's a legal minimum, even for Housing New Zealand.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes, it would be consistent.
Yeah.
Yep, so that's been said. So I've got Councillor Stewart, Worship the Mayor, and Councillor Cooper.
Yes, I'm over here. Yeah. One of the concerns that I think, and maybe you can answer, is that a lot of landlords are now wanting to get out of rental properties because, especially if it's going to be a 90-day thing, if they're going to have tenants that are going to trash a house, because, you know, once they know that the house is starting to get trashed, leaving it for that extra time, and for 90 odd days they can really do a lot of damage. In some instances, some houses that I'm aware of, and some of them from way back, that had actually been really quite trashed, and I mean, you know, not only not paying the rent, and sometimes, you know, up to $20,000 or whatever, but also trashing the house and having probably $30,000 or $40,000, $50,000 worth of damage. I think maybe when we're looking at all of this, we really need to make sure that we've got something in there that's also protecting landlords, that if they need to evict somebody because there's a real serious problem, you know,
yeah. So in the reform document, there is still tenant obligations. So in those cases, they wouldn't be meeting their obligations. The landlords can still take the tenant to the tenancy tribunal as they can, and work with the tenancy tribunal for a potentially early eviction, or to ensure that the tenants meet their obligations.
Yeah, I know that, but I know in some instances people have had you know, they've also not only had a lot of rent that they're owed, but they've also had, you know, their properties completely trashed, and it's taken quite some time, even through the tenancy tribunal, to get the people out. And sometimes, you know, it can end up being hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. And
So you're
that's why a lot of people are now considering, with what's going on here, they're considering getting out of owning rental properties, because they can see that, you know, all they're going to be doing is they're going to be having their properties trashed or rent not paid, and that's a fact.
Okay.
So you
Thank
should
you.
suggest an amendment.
Worship, gonna
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Just in regard to the warrant of fitness scheme proposed for boarding houses, which I think is a good idea, and if you only have to look at some of the boarding houses around to see how necessary it is, you describe it, there is a risk that council would be the regulatory authority. My first question is, wouldn't council be best suited to provide that regulation, because we have to do that anyway? And the second question is, wouldn't we we shouldn't automatically assume, but I presume what we'd be pushing for in the event that we carry out that function, it would be on a cost recovery basis.
Through the Chair, yes, that decision hasn't been made yet, and we expect that that will be considered in the next phase of this process, but yes.
Have we been explicit? I'm trying to remember what was in our submission. Were we explicit about our ability to do it, but on the basis of cost recovery?
Yep.
We did comment on that, but we didn't comment specifically on who would be the regulatory authority, because we anticipate there will be an opportunity to comment on that in the next phase.
Is there anybody else that has I mean, we do inspections of these buildings anyway, to see that it meets basic standards. Is there anybody better placed to be the regulatory authority, or would the government, outside of requiring councils to do that, have to set up an entirely new bureaucracy?
So through the Chair, the council is well placed. However, we are cautious around the cost-benefit analysis. So we had to dig quite deep to find that cost-benefit analysis. It's quite a large amount of money, and there's no assurance at this stage that it would be full funding. So what operational staff have indicated is it is a job needing to be done, and trying to let this committee kind of keep silent at the moment on taking up the charge that yes, we could do it. I mean, there are ways for government to pick up that role, but it may mean there is a bureaucracy that they would have to develop. But at this stage, all we've pushed for is the full charging ability in the submission, so that if it came to us, we would be able to charge for it. Because they estimated it was $9 million.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. So are you satisfied that what we've got in the submission is strong enough to say, if we are required to do this, it must be on the basis of full cost recovery? I think you need to make that pretty explicit and pretty hard, because otherwise you'll find the usual thing is it's passed on from central government to local government. We meet we pick up the costs. So I just think I'm not sure who we are going to have to make this submission, but we need to emphasise that point.
We will amend the submission and make it more explicit. You'll see the recommendations allow us to make any changes you want and check them back through the chair.
Yeah, so that's on...
I certainly support that. Thank you, Mr
So that's
Chairman.
on recommendation B, Your Worship. So, Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, I
and
think
then Councillor Watson.
just building on that, at the moment, MB, we do work with MB, but they've got no powers to enter. Maybe we need to give them some powers to enter, because yes, cost recovery, but it's about our capacity as well. So that we have to go with them to allow them to inspect, and it's very complicated. We're the only warranted officers that can go in at the moment, and if you look at our page, oh, it doesn't have our page number on it, but it's page 10 of the actual submission, number 45. We work with MB, but they don't have any powers. So ridiculously, a government agency having no powers, so maybe they need to sort of work that one out. I don't know, just to make it better and more streamlined. But they have to wait for us before, and we haven't got the capacity on the day or whatever. So that's that one. The other issue was we do the physical stuff. It's about the physical state of the house. And of course, some of our southern local boards have real concerns around issues around who's put in boarding houses, the effect on local communities, etc., etc. We work with MSD sort of to help identify those with vulnerable needs, but we need to be careful around that as well, that we don't then become our staff don't then become the social workers. So maybe that's what I mean about MB having powers to do that. They can work with MSD because we're getting pulled into that being MSD sort of agents around that, and I don't think that's, it takes up a lot of time, there's no cost recovery on it. It's essential it is essential work, but we're always, as usual, last man standing caught in the middle of this. And there's an expectation from our local boards that we do this stuff, but it isn't really our core business. So I don't know how you work that in, and Kataraina understands this fully. But yeah, so I just think we've got to have some clarity around that. It's critical with our community not wanting, poor placements and the effects there. And we have to have boarding houses because we've got to have places, especially single men on their own who've had issues and problems. We've got to put them somewhere when they come out of prison or places like that, but we need to have some proper work around helping those people. So that's that one. The other one was, we talk about boarding houses. Is there any talk in here around our caravan parks? Because they become de facto boarding houses, and some of them are disgusting in their state, but also in their exploitation of people. And they fall through the cracks because they're caravan holiday park, but we know they're homes for people. And that really worries me, and we have a terrible example out west of that. And now the gangs have moved in there as well, and it's even worse in Ranui. So I don't know if we can somehow make some suggestion that at least they be brought in under the boarding, seeing the boarding houses are in here, that there's some...
So there's few comments and then
Sorry,
pictures aligned to it.
Yeah,
and that's...
I'm trying to explain. I think Kataraina knows what I mean, but if we've got an opportunity to talk to the government about that, I've got no powers there really.
So through the chair, the proposal does propose that
Sorry, I hadn't...
the government proposal proposes that MB get powers of entry to boarding houses and homes without invitation. So they are trying to plug that hole. And it is our understanding that caravan parks are not covered by this Act.
So where is that going to fall? Nowhere.
I'm not sure at this stage.
Well, is it an opportunity, through you, Mr. Chairman, to actually just make some sort of statement around that is left out of everything? It's
under 58 on page 12, it does make that suggestion about the report page 12, not our page 12. It's the last page, page of item 9, section 58. It says that consider the recommendations of the Social Services Committee inquiry and briefing into long-term caravan park.
Sorry, thank you. I haven't got to that far.
Okay. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Just a question on that estimated annual cost for inspecting the boarding houses. That seems like a lot of money, and that potentially a lot of inspectors, and 9.9 million. Why would that cost be so high?
Through the chair, the costs are based on a cost-benefit analysis that was commissioned by MB back in 2014, and that we did admittedly a fairly rough estimate to try and get a sense of what the cost implications would be for Auckland, based on prorating the number of rental houses in Auckland compared to the rest of the country. So we admit that it is an estimate. But we just wanted to provide an indicative figure based on the best information that we had.
Was that rental properties generally or boarding houses? I thought this was just boarding houses.
It is boarding houses, but we use the number of rental properties as an approximation to estimate the number of boarding houses because the data was national, the cost estimates were national, so we needed to pro-rata it for Auckland, and that's the basis on which we could do it. That was the best we could do, and we know that that's not a perfect figure.
Okay. My other question goes to the property managers. We make a comment on the pivotal position they have, and certainly if you listen to some of the people that are looking to submit on this legislation, the property managers are very important, both for safeguarding the rights of both tenants and landlords. We more or less make that observation, but we don't say anything particular about registration or licensing then, is that correct?
Through the chair, correct, that was out of scope in the reform document.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we will be reliant on government to pick up or do anything that they see fit with that then after the fact?
Outside the scope for this particular consultation.
Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Doesn't pertain exactly to this Te Tauranga, but I'm interested in, is the government or MB doing any work about shareholding in houses, partial tenancy agreements that give greater certainty and that sort of issue where people can actually buy into a home, but not all of it? So rather than the yes or no we have in New Zealand, you own a house or you lease or you rent a house, is this, we moving anywhere somewhere halfway between? It's been suggested to them, I was wondering if they're picking it up.
So we're not aware of any specific current initiatives, but often that doesn't mean something isn't going on. Government's in a bit of a period of frantic activity, but we haven't been able to ascertain whether they're doing that at the moment. We're hoping as part of the affordable housing work that was approved last month by the Planning Committee, we'll be able to talk to some of our contacts and get a better feel for that.
Thank you.
I think last question, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on the property managers, just something I'm not sure if you're aware of, but with the property managers, can we have something written in there that property managers need to be held accountable also while they're managing the property? I can think of a property probably about 15, 16 years ago where property managers were managing a property, I'm just so you've got an understanding of what can happen, had been managing a property and a lot of local residents were ringing the council, ringing me, ringing everybody, try and sort out the problem. There was a lot of young people have moved into this property and they're having lots of parties and things, and they completely trashed the house. They'd actually even got into the ceilings and they'd cut holes in all the ceilings and all the doors and the lights and flooded the house. It was terrible, and the only way that we eventually got them out was that they'd left pizzas outside and the rats came, and we got an eviction order from the council to get them out, and it was really a terrible situation, and the owners of the property were working in America and they'd rented the house out and the property manager managing it. And, you know, so I think sometimes we need to have something in there that property managers also need to take some responsibility.
So Katarana, I just get a response in regards to the question and comments that were raised.
So the relationship between a landlord and the property management team they may or may not hire is a service contract between those two parties. That service contract is not part of this reform. What's part of this reform is that those people become the landlord when they represent, but they have a private agreement with the person who owns the property, and they're not getting into that level of detail. But I would say that there are horror stories from both landlords and tenants' sides around renting, and I suppose government's trying to get that balance between the rights and responsibilities of tenants and landlords. So we can, lots of people will also bring up tenants' nightmare stories of their landlords, and the government's trying to pitch in the middle. I do think they are worried given the rise in renters in New Zealand. One of the other things that we will need to think about in our affordable housing work is that perhaps New Zealand needs more professional renters. So it's not their own home, they develop to rent, they're aware of some of the management issues around tenancies. Overseas, every time they rent, they plan to repaint, recarpet every time the tenant moves out. And so we do have that issue where it's a lot of investor or mom and pop renters or people who are away and it's their actual family home. So this is part of the solution, but the other part is to look at the market around, kind of professional rental developments, and that will help with some of those issues in the long term, as well as tenure.
Okay, let's leave it between those two parties. His Worship the Mayor, and then I got one question, and then if there's no comments, I'll put the recommendation.
Two points as a result of the last comment from Katarina. Look, I think maybe in our submission promoting to the government support for build to rent, because that's what happens in Europe and that's what gives you the long-term security, would be a good thing to do if you can fit a section in. But I just want to go back to the boarding house. We're doing, or have been doing since July 2015, proactive boarding house inspections according to bullet point 49. Do we charge for that at the moment, or is that just part of the requirements on council? Because we might be able to make an asset out of something we're already doing. If we take on the task formally of inspecting it to seek the ability to cost recovery for that role.
I like your thinking.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. So the current proactive boarding homes inspections is through our existing work activities. And so we've got probably in Auckland between 160 to 200 boarding houses. So we prioritize and target boarding houses for inspections. And it's based on criteria such as high risk and high harm. And we target our inspections to the boarding houses where we can make the most amount of difference. And there's no charge for our inspections.
So this could, if we work this well, we could do it on a regular and consistent basis and seek cost recovery for that role, is what my suggestion is to you in the submission. Thank you.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak in favour of both what the Mayor's just mentioned and the Deputy Mayor brought up a little bit earlier around these, the ability to incorporate something around alternative ownership models. I think we mentioned rent to own or other mechanisms of people being able to gain equity in their long-term situations, especially when you mentioned about the idea of professional renters and things like that. For people to build some wealth and get ahead. I would endorse those comments and would like to see that included.
Yeah, cool. Just look, just one question now. In regards to the scope of our submission, I'd be interested in your comment around tenants who do not meet requirements can be evicted within less than 90 days' notice.
So that is the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. The landlord can take the tenant to the tenancy tribunal
So
if they're not meeting their obligations.
So it falls under that. Okay then, thank you. Is there no further comments? It's been moved and second. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 10, healthy homes. This is why it was important that we put this one straight after this one, the residential tenancy. So I'll introduce, Sophie, you can introduce yourself and Adrian And I'll move the recommendation for discussion. Second, Healthy Homes, Councillor Clay. All yours, Sophie.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sophie Hayway Tokuinga, and I'd like to introduce Adrienne Feasy, who's a home performance specialist in my team. Really nice follow-on from the previous presentation. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which has been newly created out of MB, is consulting on the proposed healthy home standards for rental properties, and in your agenda you'll find the consultation document and our draft response. So what the standards are asking us, so they're asking us for feedback on 5 standards, and there's 2 other questions. The standards are on heating, and they include questions such as what minimum achievable indoor temperature should heating devices be sized for in rental homes, and where should heating be located. Insulation, including what is an appropriate level of insulation for rental homes and how should the condition of insulation be assessed. Ventilation, including what is the appropriate level of ventilation to ensure rental homes have adequate airflow in areas of high moisture. Moisture ingress and drainage, including are existing laws for rental homes sufficient to protect against moisture and inadequate drainage, or could regulations better protect against moisture entering the home? And draft stopping, including what appropriate measures should landlords take to stop drafts in a rental home. So the attachment in your agenda outlines our specific response to each of those proposals. However, overall, Council is proposing the highest of the standards that are being consulted on. There are much higher standards, such as 6-star green building standards that all new Panuku developments will be built to. So the question might be, why are we recommending the highest standards proposed? But these are by no means the highest standards that exist. Or I have a clicker. If there's any question why we are proposing these levels, then this family is a good example. Dawn Robbie lives at this Papakura home with her partner Cameron and her 2 daughters, a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old, and they pay $520 a week.
Oh my goodness.
The house has an incorrectly connected stormwater system and blocked drains, resulting in an ankle-deep swamp underneath the house and an unusable flooded yard when it rains. It has been like that for at least 21 months since they moved in. Dawn's daughter got bronchitis at 10 months old, and Dawn herself contracted strep throat. Her landlord has laughed at her when she has requested repairs to the drainage onto the property. Housing Minister Phil Twyford has himself used this as an example of why things need to be changed. And Dawn is not alone. Each year 1,600 people die from excess winter mortality, which is partly attributable to New Zealand's low indoor temperatures, and 10,800 children with potentially housing quality related health issues present to New Zealand hospitals each year. Housing is one of the key modifiable determinants of health, and inadequate, poor quality housing can have far-reaching impacts on health outcomes. People who live in unhealthy homes are at increased risk of contracting serious and avoidable illness such as meningitis and rheumatic fever. If these standards are chosen, the 38.5% of Aucklanders who live in rental properties will have the right to warmer, drier and more energy efficient homes. So the other 2 questions that we've asked to respond on are around timing and implementation of the standards. So when and how should healthy homes standards be implemented, and when and how should the standards be enforced? The submission notes the requirement for effective enforcement of the standards to achieve the desired outcomes, and we request that we be included in discussions with Ministry relating to how the standards be implemented, including through enforcement, education and incentivisation programs. The draft submission also recommends that landlords should be required to make these upgrades either at the start of a new tenancy, or if the tenancy is not renewed in the next 4 years, by a specific end date of 2022, not the proposed 2024. This will give landlords 4 years to meet the standards while ensuring tenants experience health benefits sooner. So the due date for submissions to Ministry is 22 October. Local boards have been provided the consultation documents also, and any provided to us by the state, which I believe there are 6, will be attached verbatim to our submission. And that's all from me. Over to you, any questions?
Thank you both. Any comments to make? No? Okay, I'm going to open up to questions. And I mean, as what's happened with the previous agendas, you can make comments as well.
Okay,
Simpson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep it brief and do a bit of both. I'll start with a comment actually, and if one decision I could make in this term that makes a difference, I think this one would be one of them. That article it makes me just feel ill, that it's actually possible for people you know, to pay over $500 a week to live like that is just so wrong. So I'm very happy to support this. I think there's a line though between that and the tweaking that is with homes that are kind of reasonable too, and you know, they're maybe older homes and now they have a window, that's all they've had. Now you're adding potentially extractor fans and other, you know, not all stoves have things over them to clear the cooking, and now we're adding that. So I think the period of time to do, I mean, that for me is a lot less than some of the major stuff that we're doing here. My question though is around the Great Barrier local board feedback. Did you read that one? That was a tricky one for me, because of course they talk about the fact that their homes are all heated by fireplaces, and I just wondered how I know that we're trying to sort of put one standard across Auckland, and I think it's really good, but it was very interesting that their rental and their way of life on the island was potentially a little bit different, and by putting these standards over on the island, do we feel comfortable that is actually in line with the way people live on the island and how sort of the community and the ethos of living on Great Barrier as opposed to, you know, in other parts of Auckland? I don't know that I'm getting my message across quite well, but
Yeah, that's right.
you know, they are a bit of a different in community.
Adrian.
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, so in island-based communities like that, they are much more energy conscious. To use diesel or other forms of energy for heating is usually much more expensive. And so wood burners are one of the primary heating sources. The standard does allow for wood burners to be the primary heating source in the living room. So from that point of view, what we've recommended is consistent with the way the bulk of homes are heated in Great Barrier. The requirement for heating in bedrooms, which we've also advocated for in terms of a portable solution, would ultimately leave it to the tenant to decide whether they would use that heating device, and the tenant is usually the person responsible for meeting the energy costs. So it would still, I think in those environments, that the tenant would be making a decision about using the device based on their energy source. If they're using solar power, for example, they would bear that cost.
Okay, and my second question is the same question I asked last time, and that is, are these standards the same as Housing New Zealand standards? So are we going to have all tenants, all rental properties with the same kind of standards? We're not going to have a private landlord that rents out a home with a higher standard than perhaps Housing New Zealand, or vice versa? Is it consistent? Is it consistent across the board?
Housing New Zealand's included in those standards. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you.
Sayers, Cooper, and then Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Three brief questions. One was just trying to clarify. It's really picking up on a statement you made earlier, and Councillor Simpson's comment there about the standards, specifically the 6-star. So 6-star to do with the Kiwi Build initiative versus Councillor Simpson's question. So I'm just trying to understand. I think what I heard you say is 6 stars are higher level than what's been recommended. So who's in that 6-star bracket, and is there a significant difference?
Yeah, so the 6-star I referred to was a New Zealand Green Building Council standard for new builds. So Panuku, it was just an example, Panuku is building all its new housing developments to that standard. So that's considered to be the Rolls-Royce standard at this point in time. I think you can go up to 10-star in some countries.
It can go up to 10. The average New Zealand home currently is about a 2.5 to 3.
Right. So there was just an example of, we're saying while we're proposing the higher standards that the Ministry are proposing, it's by far not the highest standard you can get to.
Okay, no, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Thank you for that answer. Second question, Mr. Chair, was just to do with just clarification, I think I've got this correct, that the Healthy Home Standard, a part of that includes this warrant of fitness certification. That's part of the gig.
Part of the proposal?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, so we have put forward a recommendation that there is a form of a rating system by which the standard can be measured. That would make it easier to communicate to landlords and tenants what's involved in meeting the standard.
Yep, okay, very good, thank you very much. And the third one was just around the costs, where there was an estimate there, could cost landlords $11,000 or $12,000, is a figure that's mentioned in the report. And with some landlords, that's, in terms of the margins they might be making, it's going to take them a while to recover that investment, right? But my question's probably more around the percentage of landlords that we're talking about that would have to spend that type of money. You know, are we talking about 50% of the rental stock out there, or do we have any idea what percentage of landlords might have to spend that type of money?
Yeah, I think that's a worst case estimate, and a very small percentage would be up for that. Most houses would be, you know,
$200.
a fraction of that. We don't have those. We don't have any assessment of how many. Yeah.
I know, look, your answer's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just to yeah. So that's if each of the standards had to be applied to a house, the cost to meet that standard in Auckland would be approximately $11,000 to $12,000. But given the housing stock in Auckland, you wouldn't expect a high proportion to be in that situation.
Okay. Thank you for your answers, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Cool. Councillor Cooper and then Watson, and then
Thank you.
hopefully put the recommendation.
My question was around 1.4, around the option of fixed or portable heating devices. I just wanted to understand why you opted for the one with portable, just because there's two issues. One is, you know, sometimes they, you know, if you're saying in the early one, living room and bedrooms, and then people are moving them to other places where we haven't said they should be for bedrooms, etc. So there's that one, but also, and some people won't like this, but I have seen when people leave rental properties, they go right down to the light bulbs, the curtains, everything is gone, often stripped out of a house. And so that would just mean an owner having to keep replacing the portable devices. But also portable devices that you can buy are things like those horrible gas heaters, which are very bad. They're cheap to buy, you can get them at the warehouse, and if a landlord can buy those, they are very damp and terrible, plus dangerous. So I just wonder why you said that, because we know that a fixed heating would be much better.
Yeah, so any items left by a landlord in a house get listed as chattels on the tenancy agreement. So if a tenant took those, then they would be liable in their bond.
No, I'm talking about if you but we know you can never recover that. I don't know if you've ever been through the tenancy tribunal as a landlord. You will never recover that. Okay. It'll cost you more going along to do it, so you just give up.
Recoverable from the bond, I mean.
Yeah, but what happens is people just don't pay their rent for the last 2 weeks, and then the bond's gone. So that's the reality of having private rentals. So what I'm saying is more to the point is about the fixed heating devices are more effective anyway. You know, like heat pumps or those panels, they're actually more effective, and you get a better result than saying, oh, well, I can just buy one of those ones. So that's why I'm actually kind of on your side saying let's not give an out by just providing some cheap and nasty kind of heater that might not be effective.
Yep, through the chair. So we have made a recommendation to look at whole of house central heating systems as an approved form of heating as well. And we have also made a recommendation that for the non-fixed heating appliances, that some guidance is given around the type of system. For example, fixed panel heaters that have a thermostat control and a timer. So that would go some way to addressing having heating in bedrooms, which is the main goal, but do it in a way that it's not easy to remove.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is then you're supporting portable. That's what I'm not understanding.
Oh, it's mentioned in the
You're supporting portable heating devices, but you're answering me with fixed solutions. So that's what why are we supporting movable, your support, in the response, council supports option 2, with a caveat about fixed. So I don't understand why we're supporting at option 2. You know, I don't feel like I can hear the answer.
What are the other options we're given, Sophie?
It was fixed heating only or fixed and portable, and we're supporting fixed and portable, where we know portable isn't very good for both tenant and landlord.
We've looked at.
Or am I reading that wrong? Sorry. Is there another piece?
Yeah, no, I can see where,
Yep.
yeah.
So
You can't make landlords only.
with the portable heaters, we install, I think, about the cutting house because we want a heating solution in the bedrooms.
Yeah, because who's going to be the heater police anyway?
And who's going to put?
Who's going to check if you bought a suitable portable heating device? Who's going to come and check you? They're not. So I just think you give too much leeway, that's all. So be considered whoever's signing
So in
off.
regards to, just to sort of get some stuff, in regards to the options, and there are only 2?
Yep.
So maybe that's a decision that we could make here in regards to which options we would rather support than, so I'm assuming, Councillor Cooper, that you're saying that let's support the ones with fixed only. If we do, what are the repercussions, or not repercussions, but if that's the case, that's our position, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I suppose, just if I speak to that, I'm actually supporting, if you look at landlords and tenants in this, one is for the landlord, it's a one-off cost, it's done, yes, it might take a little bit while, but then it can't be taken out. It doesn't have to be replaced every time a tenancy changes if it's taken. And from the tenant's point of view, it's usually a much more effective form of heating. You know, and so I just think that it's a better balance, that's all.
So Sophie, if that actually happened with this committee, there'd be no issue with that, because
we'd support that.
obviously we'll end up coming through. So
I'd be
if
open
that's
to
the
what
change,
people
I
think,
want to then get some comments from the committee, and if we change it, we change it.
Yep, that's fine.
So if there's any comments around getting that changed, that it then we go for the option where it's fixed.
I'm not sure about that.
That's why I put the
That's
option in.
fine.
So
I'm not sure about that. Can
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of see your point, and I know, you know, that was when I read it, I thought, oh look, the people just nick the heaters, you know, blah blah blah. But I'm not sure that potentially we're saying every home in Auckland has to have fixed heaters in every bedroom. I'm not sure that's a good thing to say. So I'm sorry, Councillor,
that's
but
right.
I do.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, but I think it was easier than sort of going back to Sophie and Adrian and sort of saying, hey, look what we do, because they're in a position. So it was better for me to put that to us as a committee. And I mean, look, at the moment, if there's no others that we'll stay with the submission, and then we can sort of go through from there, because it seems that.
I do get your point that there'll be nicked. That's my first thought.
Yeah.
But
No, it's
Happy
fine.
with it? Okay
I'll put
then.
my view forward.
Yeah,
We'll
cool.
see how it plays out.
Yeah, definitely, because look, I guarantee that later on we'll end up sort of
Mr.
getting
Chairman,
something
I
back.
suppose, just one more comment. As long
Yep.
as the council aren't the heater checking police to see that every time a new tenancy there is a new portable heater being purchased and put in there.
Okay. So look, Sophie, we'll stay with our submission
Yes,
as it's written.
So Adrian's just pointed out to me that panel heaters weren't actually listed as a fixed device. It was more around wood burners and gas fluid heaters, which is why we said that it should be
Okay.
not just fixed.
Okay. Well, you've got the mid. Councillor Watson, and then hopefully then we'll put the recommendation.
Just a question on the cost that has been quoted here, $11,000 to $12,000. That of course wouldn't take any account of any ancillary work that might go to, perhaps I'm thinking particularly of bathrooms, of taking away mould or replacing jib or stuff like that. And I say that because in the current market there's huge waiting time, and costs for pretty basic work seems to have just gone, ridiculous. Do those costs kind of take account of actually what's happening out in that marketplace?
No, the repairs haven't been quoted in that figure.
No.
That's the cost of the appliances and work done, including labour, to meet standard.
So conceivably, there could be repair costs to
Old and damp.
to go on top of it. Okay, great. The other one just goes to that point 44 to do with the who's going to bear the funding burden of any enforcements. And I know you did say that it didn't seem to be that many homes, but it would be quite a big significant number of. It would be a fairly substantial cost in enforcement, wouldn't it? And one I would suggest that would be out of the council's league, really, unless we were getting some funding arrangement with government.
Yeah, I think the small proportion we talked about was the worst case scenario, but there would be an awful lot of houses that needed retrofit, probably including my own. The enforcement question, I think, was well answered by Katarana's team, but yes, we believe that there would need to be a major cost recovery from any enforcement role that we would take. Yeah, that's a future step.
Okay. So there's no further questions or comments. Just to let everybody know that the local board feedback has been tabled and it'll be, Sophie, I'm assuming, be attached to our submission.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool bananas. Okay then, I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time check, just to let everybody know, it's 12 minutes past 11. And John, go to item 11, all the legs, and the emissions trading scheme.
Kia ora tātou, ko John Moro Tako Ongoa, ko Tako Toranga, hey Chief Sustainability Officer, aho. I think it's still morning. You're doing well. I think I have some pictures to show. This one is a submission that we made on the news.
Sorry, John, just before you put the submission, I'm just going to move it and get a second in regards to it. Or Wayne, did you want to move and second? Yeah, I'll second. So, Wayne, thank you. So just put it on the table now for discussion. Sorry, John.
Hey, no problem. So I'll take you through this quickly. Hopefully, this is about the New Zealand Emissions Trading Scheme. I'll keep my verbal emissions to a minimum, and we could just take questions at the end. But just a few slides here. What is it? It was established in 2008, essentially to provide an economic incentive for us to take a reduction approach to emissions across the country. Largely, it was ineffective. We had the price of carbon at something like a few cents a ton at one point in time, so it really didn't do what it said it was going to do. And what government's been doing over the course of several years, and especially now, is to try to retool it to make it fit for purpose. I'd like to link to the previous submission that you approved around healthy homes and the fact that this actually drives an all-economy approach, so that hopefully at the end of a successful scheme, you won't have some of those problems in the built environment that we currently do now. There's also a link to the zero carbon bill. The ETS is linked to that submission we took through this committee a couple of months ago as a key lever to get to a zero carbon economy in society. So what's the scope for improvements? Again, like I said, it's to make it fit for purpose, to align with the zero carbon bill, to manage the supply of units, these emission units that are traded, to develop a ceiling for that, a different price ceiling than the current one, and to resolve some technical and operational issues to create better transparency and a degree of certainty for the market to move forward over the coming decades. Our submission goes through 6 main points. I'll take you through them very, very briefly, but it's right in front of you. I'm sure you've read. We're supporting things like the modeling to look at cost of emissions reductions. We're recommending that a portion of proceeds from the ETS go to local government efforts to drive down emissions and become more adaptable to climate change. We're suggesting that those who receive free emissions credits have to justify that and actually demonstrate action to reduce their emissions. We're supporting public reporting and review of data, essentially just transparency. We're recommending a provision to support small to medium enterprises that might have a harder time complying to this. And we're also supporting an ambitious transition that actually means getting rid of coal as quickly as we can. I just wanted to connect up to some of the work we've done with you and across sector. Just a week and a half ago, we had a series of 4 workshops with our subject matter experts from across a variety of businesses and organizations. This was a small piece of this. The emissions trading scheme is the market-based system to put a price on emissions, but there's a larger scheme of what we're doing right now, not just the actions we're taking currently, but the work we're doing on an international scene, the work that we're doing with you and local boards, central government, and others to develop a plan and a path forward. And just some visuals from that just the other week. It was a lively group of folks, so by way of just getting you across that at the same time as a submission, we got some very robust feedback on where we need to head to over the coming decade. I think that's all I have. You've seen this before. This is our timeline for the development of our plan, and happy to take any questions.
Questions and comments? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just querying, you're talking about different industries having potential variances and different scopes. Would you like to elaborate a bit more on that, please?
So, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, I didn't quite hear the question.
So in the submission, we're talking about different industries having different levels of emission taxation and so forth in variable areas.
Yes.
Wait a bit more on that, please.
Yes, certainly. So depending on the industry, you will have a varying degree of carbon intensity and footprint for your industry. And so as we look, as I think we said here not too long ago, at a regional approach, sector by sector, it's really transport that sticks out for Auckland. Of course, we've got some industrial activities in the city as well, and those actually feature pretty high on our footprint. So there's a provision in there. So we at the mayor's request and the mayor's office request did consult with finance, legal, and the chief economist on this. And there's some sense that we need to be careful about how we move industry forward. Hence, the zero carbon bill is a multi-decade really pathway to get on the right track. And this emissions trading scheme is one of the components of that. So industry by industry, the approaches will be different. The idea is the price signal behind all of that gives a fair playing ground. I will offer this as well, that agriculture was not part of this discussion, so it's not part of this consultation at this point, and it likely will be in the future.
Yeah, I was thinking about the steel mill more than anything else. But
yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, there's no further questions. Any comments? If not, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Item 12, just a dozen. And it's our early position on the Three Waters review. Sarah and Andrew. Oh, yours. So I'll move recommendation just to open it up for discussion. Second, Councillor Clay. Tēnā koutou.
Chair, thank you. I don't have a presentation, but I'll just speak briefly to the report and the attachment. So as the report states, the Minister of Local Government announced earlier this year that she is embarking on a Three Waters review, which is looking at both the regulation of water and how it is provided, so the service delivery arrangements. And it's partly in response to the Havelock North inquiry. So we've had, you'll remember, we've had a couple of workshops on this, including a discussion with the Watercare Board at the Joint Governing Body Watercare Board workshop. The purpose of this paper and the letter is to put some early positions to the government, given the significance of or the potential significance of the reform. The timeline is, we understand, is the government will be making decisions on the regulation and possible water regulator in 2019, and the service delivery will follow on and possibly might even extend into 2020. So as I said, there are two main parts to the reform, the review, the regulation and service delivery. While they're all significant, we are potentially more interested in the service delivery side, especially at this stage. So the options that the government has put forth are at an early stage, and some of those will affect Auckland if they're progressed. They are, briefly, they're all kind of tend to be driving towards fewer and larger water services providers, so to try and get the economies of scale and capability. So the letter sets out the kind of early, the sort of main points that we want to communicate to the government, and there are 4 sort of main points there. The first is strong support for continued public ownership for water assets. The government's made a commitment to that, so that's off the table, any changes to that. The second is around subsidies and making it clear that any increased costs for other parts of New Zealand that come from higher regulation, any subsidies that the government wants to provide should come from the central purse, not from local areas. So that's effectively kind of avoiding subsidising more rural areas by from user charges and rates from urban areas. And then the third is around, kind of encouraging the government to consider other options than it has discussed to date. So whether there could be, the council could enter into a contractual arrangements to share the benefits of our size and scale, with obviously through water care and healthy waters, rather than just hard structural changes, which is seems to be what is on the table at the moment. And lastly, communicating that the government should think carefully around whether stormwater is included in any changes to service delivery, because of the nature of stormwater and the fact that it's more tangibly linked to land use and transport decisions than the water and wastewater, which are closed networks. So Andrew is here as well, Andrew Chin, Auckland Water's Program Manager. So we're happy to answer any questions about the paper or the letter.
Okay, look, I'll invite Andrew, if you have any comments, my friend, to end up saying what you need to say now. If not, I'll open it up for questions.
I'm happy to just respond to questions, Mr. Chair.
Is Bishop the Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been summed up well by Sarah. The nature of the letter that we drafted arises out of the meeting that we had with Water Care and the key points that came out of that. There was, I think, broad councillor support for it, but we felt we needed to get that letter in now while they're still looking at options, and to exclude the possibility that will be fitted into some predetermined framework that doesn't fit Auckland as a model. Our view is that Auckland actually is showing the way that it can be done. We'll work cooperatively with other councils alongside us, but we don't have to be forced into amalgamation with them. So I think the summary was a good summary, and I think the letter encompasses the view as expressed back to me by councillors the other day.
Cool. No questions or comments?
No, it's good.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, there was an issue that I raised around water that goes to water and sewage that goes to sustainability, and the particular concern that I would suggest that in some instances it's not sustainably viable to prop up communities or locations where the cost of providing the water and the wastewater is incredibly high. And I would have real concerns around any subsidies that might exist around that. We just had a previous exercise around low carbon and so on. The carbon costs that go to water and sewage are very significant. So I don't know whether there's any prospect of picking that up, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So is your point about avoiding subsidies? Because I think that point is made in the letter in the paper. But if these sort of other,
it's about avoiding subsidies, but also avoiding a situation where an area is subsidised when, frankly, it might be better for the people to provide their own rainwater off the roof, or or some other option that is more sustainable.
At least we can take that on board.
Yes, we're
Yep.
happy to take that on
So
board.
it's been taken on board. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you. Probably just picking up on Councillor Walker's comment there. Certainly just another question, maybe another angle around it. Is it, say in the urbanised area, is it compulsory for somebody to have to hook onto our freshwater networks? Is that compulsory in terms of policy? Or is that more to do with consenting, and it goes through the consenting process, that they may encourage that? If somebody doesn't want to connect on, have they got the options and policy-wise, but when it actually gets down to the nitty-gritty and going for consent, are they kind of obligated to do it, or kind of, what options do they have?
Through the chair, so we can compel people to connect to the network, provided that their property is within a minimum distance of the public supply. If it's, then that's for drainage, and that's under the Local Government Act. I'm not 100% certain on the potable water supply, but you must provide a potable water supply. So, for example, in beachlands, people have rainwater tanks, but are connected to the public drainage. So, our powers of compulsion under Section 511 of the Local Government Act allow us to compel people to connect for drainage. The potable water is different, I believe.
Okay.
Yep. So there's no further questions, comments to both of you. Thank you so much. I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. There's 3 minutes to our 11:30 deadline, but look, I think we'll get through another item. So it's item 13, unlucky for some. And Councillor Clow and Simpson could move and second that. That'll be great. And also for item 14 when we get it, because of the finance and performance issues with it. Cool.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair and councillors. Lovely to be with you this morning, and 13 is certainly lucky for me. So, first of all, I'd just like to, I've got a brief presentation, so I presume I just... I'd just like to highlight it in the 2 attachments that are at the back of the report, because I think they give a very nice map of the activity that's currently occurring under the water quality targeted rate. And the great thing from my perspective is this gives a very good regional perspective, that the water quality targeted rate is a regional program, and we've got a number of activities underway in just about all of the region. And the other thing I'd like to acknowledge is just the tremendous amount of work that's done to get this program up to speed very quickly. 10 years sounds like a long time, but it actually isn't that long a time to deal with some of these issues, which, as you know, have been around for a long, long time. And so we've really got the foot hard down on the accelerator at the moment. So there are 5 tranches that make up the program. One is around the Western Isthmus, one is around sedimentation, one is around the community and waterway improvement programs, one is around our on-site wastewater, and one is around the what we call safe networks, which is the other side of the coin of Safe Swim. And so safe networks is all about fixing the problem we find when we've got water quality issues at our beaches and in our waterways. That's just a map of the relative investment over the current financial year, and so you can see over $25.2 million pie for this year, how the money is allocated between those 5 initiatives that I've talked about previously. And the next slide just takes us onto a 10-year view of the world. That's how the money is planned to be allocated across the various activities. That's our best estimate at this time, and is almost certainly, as we get into the detailed planning and investigation and contracting, those relative splits may change a little bit, but they're probably pretty indicative of the relative investment in the different areas. An area where we have really hit the ground running hard is in the Western Isthmus. We've got 3 major programs underway at the moment. One is in St Mary's Bay and Masefield Beach, where we have just concluded the consent hearing process and we're waiting for the Commissioner's decision, which we're expecting to have in the next week or so. That is very important because we're planning to start construction on that project early next year. In fact, we're already underway with the procurement side on the contracting resource. We're also working very closely with the America's Cup Alliance around the Dawley Street project, where the outfall currently is inappropriately located right next to it's right in the heart of where the bases will be located, which is a totally unsatisfactory situation, both from an odour point of view, but also a water quality point of view. So we're planning to relocate that particular outfall, and that is requiring us to work closely with Watercare. And the third one is a major separation project that we have underway in Picton Street at the moment, and we're currently going for resource consents for that project. These works are all intended to be concluded in advance of the America's Cup. And so we're really putting a lot of urgency on these 3 particular programs because they're all going to be heavily influencing water quality in the inner Waitemata. The other 4 programs are specifically referred to in the report, so perhaps it's better if I just answer any questions that are relevant to those 4 areas. Suffice it to say that we have a number of activities underway in all 4 of those areas. We're still working through some local board workshops with a view to joining up the local board programs and the regional programs, so each area will have a set of water quality improvements that really join up those 2 activities. In the past, we've had specific local board initiatives and we've had regional initiatives, but we see a major benefit of effectively bringing those 2 programs together into a program of works which will occur within each local board area. It'll just have a variety of different funding mechanisms. And we're also intending to report regularly on this initiative, and so our next report to the committee will be in February next year. Cool. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Walker first and then Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, got a couple of questions, and I'm looking at page 158 where it mentions the Small Building Site Sediment Control and Behaviour Change Initiative. I bring this up because we had a report to the Regulatory Committee based on a case study down at Flatbush, which highlighted, frankly, a gross abuse on building sites and very significant sediment leaving these small building sites into the stormwater network and the harbours. Does this rate make allowance for budget going to compliance and monitoring? Because that was the particular deficiency there. We're just not spending anywhere near enough on compliance and monitoring.
It absolutely does, both compliance monitoring and also there's a strong education component attached to that. The neat thing about the targeted rate is it's a mixture of both CapEx and OpEx. And so the way that split will evolve will be a consequence of the final determination of the various program components. But unlike other initiatives that are relying on capital funding, this actually provides us with a really good source of OpEx funding. So ultimately, if the desire is to beef up our compliance area, we have the ability to provide financial support to assist that compliance upgrade.
And the other question I've got is around sensitive areas. For example, Okura Waiti, where you've got an adjacent marine reserve and what has been identified as a need for a higher standard of silt and sediment control in those areas. Do we have budgeting in this program for that?
Once again, if it's determined that that is an area that requires additional focus and additional concentration, yes, that is able to be incorporated within the budget.
And has that determination been made?
We have an exercise underway at the moment looking at exactly what's happening at a micro level inside that catchment, and that'll inform us as to what our next steps will need to be.
And the last question is just around stormwater intrusion into the sewage network. Is there a program that's capturing that?
Yes, under the Safe Networks program, there's a huge initiative underway with Watercare to look at illegal connections, to look at stormwater that's coming in through cracked pipes, and also the ability to replumb some of the existing combined networks going forward to make sure that we come up with the most cost-effective solution that achieves the best outcome.
And will we be having some reporting to us on the success of that, the progress on it?
Absolutely. I see that as being one of the key areas where we're going to achieve a lot of success is through proactive management in that space.
Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Simpson and then Mato Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Craig, look, thank you. This is great. This is a very good, and I especially like the map, and I think you're quite right. It highlights very easily the targeted rate right across the region. Look, my question is around monitoring of the spend and the reporting back, and it's around the comments that you made that in the past local boards have done some work in the space and they put budget towards it, and then you've had the regional stuff, right? And you say you see it better, putting it all together. And I get the theory around what you're saying. You don't want to double up, and you want to add value to potentially what this targeted rate is carrying, and they can add a bit more, and all works. But we must be very clear, or if it was a question, will we be very clear? My answer is please, yes, but mate, we are. What exactly, which bit of the targeted rate is funding? Because this isn't necessarily a local board work program. This is a regional work program of which every local board will benefit from, and it's a regional targeted water quality rate work stream. All right. So what I'm really keen on seeing is a really clear report next time that says, look, this is what the targeted rate has done for in the wards. This may or may not have been added to by the local board, whatever, but this is the targeted rate, ward by ward, across the region. We must keep the accountability back on something that is brand new in a way that actually clearly defines what this targeted rate is being spent for, and that it doesn't get lost in a board-based work stream.
I absolutely concur 100%. The success of the program is able to explain to the public exactly where the $452 million has been spent. The only point I was trying to make is that pre the targeted rate, we already had a number of water quality initiatives that were part of business as usual, and the local boards had some water quality work that was business as usual. All I'm suggesting is by incorporating both the local board initiatives, the existing business as usual, plus the new programs into a bigger program, we can achieve better outcomes as long as we maintain that degree of transparency around how the targeted rate money's been spent. There's just an additional benefit not to have multiple programs that are, just because a program is funded from a different mechanism, doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be run as an integrated program.
Yep.
But we'll make that very, very clear what's attributable to the targeted rate as opposed to what would have been attributable without the targeted rate.
Thank you. And my follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair, is that having taken some of the rep for putting on a targeted rate, please be aware who should probably lead some of the comms around the work associated with that. It's the councillors who've voted for that, and even though they're happening in individual the areas, but I think just be very careful. It's not. It's the councillor that leads the outcome of the success. Don't give us all the bad job and none of the good stuff.
I think the neat thing about the targeted rate program, there'll be a lot of love and caring and sharing for everyone to enjoy. So.
It's like kumbaya. Mato Brown.
Kia ora. A big fan of our Healthy Waters program, as you know. and as soon as I say it, you'll recall me, because I acknowledge the investment's been made, but what I can't see is investments being made in the targeted rate around improving the standards, particularly, say, stormwater, for example, insofar as I always say developers or whoever have a get out of jail licence, all they need is a heavy rainfall, and our stormwater's allowed to fail. Now, is there an intent somewhere under R&D, for example, that there'll be an investment made from out of targeted rates, or at least attributed from there, around improving standards?
There has to be an initiative around improving standards. One surrogate we've got is the Safe Swim program, which is indicating a whole lot of water quality issues in both our streams and our rivers and our beaches. But also, if you look at the general quality of stormwater, it has to be improved. And I'll give you a good, for example. We're currently in conversation with Auckland Transport around how the management of the cesspits, the stormwater network and the table drain network is currently run as a separate program by Auckland Transport, but contracted to Healthy Waters. We think there'd be a major regional benefit to bring that program under a Healthy Waters responsibility from both a funding perspective and a delivery perspective, because we can then take a far more risk-based approach to dealing with some of those issues. Because if we were to look at all of the water quality issues we've got in the region, the one biggest single point source of water quality issues we've got at the moment is the roading network. I'm not saying it's the only problem by any means, but it's 10% of the land area is roading. Therefore, in one relationship, we can deal with 10% of the problem. Yep. So we see that as being a significant step going forward.
One last, more for feedback, given the expertise in the House. I note the modelling of where the maps concentrated the investment, and it also highlights where there's minor investments, if you were, rather than none. But the concern I have would be all of this great work being done in these concentrated areas, and initially serves to improve the water quality as you're demonstrating. But if I could draw your attention to the issues that I'm concerned about that are coming out of the Waiho and the Piako rivers, that are being agitated up through the Firth and then into the Waitemata through the Tamaki Strait. So what investment or what watch do we have on that southeastern boundary around those influences? And those influences are very real.
Yeah, that is definitely a focus for us, as well as, I might add, the Kaipara catchment as well. So we've got significant issues around what's occurring in our, not only our urban catchments, but our rural catchments. So we have to work very closely with the various groups, like the various farming groups, etc., because the way that the management of those farms takes place, and the stocking and the areas that are not available for stocking, etc., and the way that planting and slope stability, etc., is achieved is going to have a huge bearing on some of the natural sediment load that's getting into our waterways at the moment. It's a real battle, and I'm not sure if we're ever going to win it, because one of the issues is that you put all this effort into big planting programs, then a storm comes along and takes it all out. And that's a real thing, and I don't know if anyone's got a silver bullet to how to solve that particular dilemma, but we can't but try to achieve the best possible outcome, but it is an ongoing battle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No. Good enough, good enough. Councillor Sayes, and then His Worship the Mayor. Hopefully we'll finish this off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Greg. Two questions. I don't know if you can answer the first one directly, but if we can, it'd be helpful, point me in the right direction. It's probably just picking up on the conversations we've been having around those sediment loads, those natural sediment loads. And I understand it's controlled by a policy, I think it was called GDO5 or something like that, that Council's got. So a little bit earlier we were talking about looking at Kura as a specific model and what's going on there. any learnings from that, Craig? Do you know if that's going to be broadened into a regional, into modifying or updating that that current policy document? That's the first question.
Okay, so the purpose for a lot of this work is to look at where we may need to take the unitary plan provisions, because that effectively would be the home of the regulatory framework. And so based on the learnings and the new knowledge we have now, I think we almost certainly, from a healthy waters perspective, will be suggesting some changes to the unitary plan in this space. And then the whole regulatory framework will cascade down from that unitary plan change process.
Okay.
And this is, it obviously goes across a whole range of different areas, but one is definitely sedimentation is going to be a key focus area for the healthy waters side of the fence.
Right. Oh, very good, Craig. Thanks for that update. It's very interesting. And second question is, I've become, just in my local patch there, I've become aware of a desire from the community. Once the natural sediments and some erosion, you know, and different sources, they want to dredge it out. So we've got policy about trying to stop the natural sediments getting into the system. I think we try and let Mother Nature take care of it as much as we can, but it seems that some of our systems regionally might be getting overloaded and that Mother Nature can't cope. And are we potentially looking at any change in direction, new policies or ideas about, you know, dredging out those things or other alternatives to help those systems, you know, cope?
A lot of the areas you're referring to are natural sedimentation zones. So if we were to get into dredging campaigns, the concern is that the dredging in 3 or 5 years' time will be back to where you started from. So if you look globally, this whole issue around additional sedimentation is a huge global issue. And it's only going to get worse with climate change and with more severe storm events, etc. And so all I can say is that we have to be very careful and eyes wide open about how we work with nature, because if we try to take nature on, I can assure you nature will always win out. And so just a little bit of a word of caution around, it sounds good, the concept of dredging out an area that's currently sedimented, but if that then reverts back to how it was in a short period of time, I'd question whether that's a good use of money.
Right. So just picking on that, so Craig, could some of it be like you go in and say you do a dredging project, it's likely to come back and therefore there's ongoing requirement, like if you start it, you've got to keep going, you know?
Yeah, there'll be a maintenance cost associated with dredging, and at some point in the economic sort of analysis, it just doesn't make good economic sense if that maintenance cost is too high.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks,
No
Craig.
problems at all. His Worship the Mayor, and then I'll put the recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just two questions, Craig, please. You say you've made significant progress in terms of the network investigations for faecal contamination on the North Manukau, the Red Beach and Takapuna Beach and Glen Innes. Can you tell us what that progress is and when we'll be able to start to see some changes occurring on those beaches?
Okay, so the good news is that if you take the Manukau Harbour, we've got 4 sites where we've been able to remove the permanent no swim signage.
Okay, that's good.
So I think that's a huge step forward from where we are. We've got work underway at Takapuna Beach at the moment. We've identified some issues with the toilet block at the north end of Takapuna Beach, which has been a significant contributor to the stormwater quality problem we've been experiencing at north end of the beach. But we've also managed to work with the harbour swimming people with some new criteria around how they run those events, which is going to enable them to run a full schedule of events this year without the adverse impact of the safe swim outcomes, and that's supported by Surf Lifesaving as well. And so I think generally there's a lot of positive things. We've got a big study underway at the moment in Red Beach. The problem with some of these issues is they do require quite detailed diagnostics to get to the root cause of the problem. That they're not simple fixes. They actually require some quite invasive investigations in order to until you get down to almost a property by property assessment, it can be sometimes very, very difficult to ascertain exactly what the root cause of the problem is.
Thanks. The second question's around St Mary's Bay and Masefield Beach. I understand you're still having some ongoing discussions with the Residents Association for Herne Bay and St Mary's. Do you know when you'll get a final outcome from those discussions?
So we're expecting the consent to come forward later this month. Obviously, we're still in the middle of a process because we've also got the Local Government Act approvals which are coming through the council in November. We really want to sit down with the local community because at the moment the conversation's been around separate systems versus combined systems.
Yeah.
But the real conversation needs to be around what is the water quality improvement that can actually be achieved and what's the most cost-effective way to achieve that water quality improvement. I think everyone's sort of boxed into a bit of a corner advocating for different technologies at the moment, but the real answer is probably a bit of both, and it's just coming to that, working through that issue with the community.
Okay, so we might see a bit of fine-tuning in that area?
Look, I am sure that ultimately the plan we come up with is one that the community will buy into because we will be able to demonstrate that we're getting the best value for money in terms of achieving some really good outcomes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Clow.
Sorry, you just mentioned the Manukau. Can you just update us on Green Bay, Wood Bay, French Bay, Huia, not Huia, sorry, yeah, no, it is Huia, yeah. So just those, well, Langholm actually I should mention, not Huia, yeah. So there's the 4 or 5 real troublesome areas there that I'm sure Local Board Chair Greg Preston would be keen to hear. Is there anything being done there at all?
Yeah, I'm just trying to recall which is the area. I'm pretty sure that it's, we've definitely had, I know Weymouth is one of the signs that we've been able to remove, which has been, and I'm pretty sure that Green Bay is one of the areas that we've been able to achieve some significant improvements as well. We've got studies underway in a number of those other areas. So if you look at the Safe Swim map, which is the last attachment, you'll see there where the various status of the activities is underway, and there's a code which indicates whether we're in implementation, whether we're in investigation, and whether, you know, what stage we are in the process. So we've tried to be as transparent as possible with the community around the status of those various areas of.
Okay. There's no further questions, comments. I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Kia ora, Craig.
Kia ora.
Now, as I said right from the beginning, once our representatives from the music industry and our staff get here, we will then shift our agenda around. So I'm going to move, and if His Worship seconds this, that item 15 goes in front of 14.
Yep.
Yep, so I'm going to move that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. I'm now going to move the recommendation. His Worship the Mayor will second the recommendation around UNESCO Creative Cities Network update presentation. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, rauranga tira mā, nau mai haere mai whakatauma. Ki ngā kaumātua me ngā koe, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou katoa, and whakalofala i atu with the New Air Language Week. So welcome, and I'm just going to say one thing, and that is 28th of June 2016, Mark, is when you came to the Arts, Culture and the Events Committee and put this proposal in regards to Tamaki Makaurau being a UNESCO City of Music, so I acknowledge you from then. Kia ora. And please introduce our manuhiri. Kia ora.
For those of you who've not been paying attention for the last 5 years, I'm Richard McCall from the Arts and Culture Unit. It would seem odd if I introduced everyone else and didn't say who I was. We're going to each individually introduce ourselves and say which agencies we represent, But just prior to starting, I just wanted to point out a couple of things, and a personal achievement that I've acknowledged with this group over the last 12 months that we've been working together is that today's presentation you're going to hear is a music-led industry presentation, but council has been acting as an enabler. We're great at doing policies and strategies and those sorts of things, so we're holding hands with the industry here, but more importantly, we're actually holding hands with each other. So this presentation is from Auckland Council, ATEED and RFA working together and regularly meeting and working on the strategy, and we've found the learnings for that have been invaluable at opening doors, at identifying opportunities for collaboration in the future. So we've really enjoyed doing that, and it's been great to be part of this project to enable that. So what we're going to do is just go down the row and introduce ourselves and the agencies that we represent.
Kia ora, Mark Roach. I represent Recorded Music New Zealand.
Kia ora koutou. Anthony Healy is my name. I'm from APRA, the Australasian Performing Right Association, an organisation of New Zealand's songwriters and music writers.
Kia ora koutou. I represent ATEED, Pam Ford.
Kia ora, my name is Bernie Haldane. I'm the Deputy Director of Auckland Live, a part of Regional Facilities Auckland.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Victoria Blood. I'm the Chair of the New Zealand Music Commission and the leader of New Zealand's Alliance of the Creative Industries, We Create.
Awesome.
So we've already seen your agenda, and we thought rather than have an information memo, you might appreciate at this point in time a PowerPoint presentation. So we've got one to show you with some pictures, and we'll invite questions from multi-agencies at the end if you've got anything you'd like to have clarity on. So Auckland UNESCO City of Music. So on the 1st of November 2017, we became Auckland City of Music within the UNESCO Creative City Network. The application was led by the music sector and endorsed by the Mayor and indeed this committee. Council worked as an enabler, as a hand holder and a tick boxer, and doing a bit of the legwork with some of the consultation and stakeholder engagement. There are 180 cities in the Creative Cities Network, 31 are music cities. In New Zealand, the only other UNESCO creative city is Dunedin, and they're a creative city of literature. So there's a number of ranges of genre from literature, music, etc., right through to gastronomy, which is part of a creative network as well.
So from an ATEED point of view, we're thrilled that the industry led this initiative. There's growing recognition of music as a transformative power, not only as a cultural staple, but also as a social and economic driver for cities. So boosting the music economy will bring dividends to Auckland, from advancing artistic and cultural growth to generating substantial economic impacts, including jobs and music tourism spending. Another primary benefit of being a city of music is the impact on the city branding. The contribution a vibrant music economy offers to the quality of life that makes people want to live and work in Auckland echoes the Mayor's vision for Auckland to be a world-class city where talent wants to live. Belonging to the UNESCO network includes strengthened strategic cooperation between international cities. Other benefits comprise reinforcing all aspects of music production and distribution, allowing for the development of innovation hubs, broadening opportunities for professionals in the music sector, and dramatically improving access for everybody to participate in musical life. Being a member of the UNESCO Creative City Network involves the use of a global brand, active involvement in the network and the sub-networks. It allows us to foster exchange and collaboration between the other network cities, a regular communication with the UNESCO Creative City Secretariat, and implementation of the action plan presented in our original application form, with all activities carried out in line with the UNESCO mission statement and strategic framework.
So with all projects, we go through different phases. So we've been in a development phase and setting up that strategy. So we've formed an interim steering committee to reflect that. So at the moment, as I sort of hinted towards before, it's been a little bit council heavy, but that's because strategy and engagement is something that we do well. And that's part of the steering group that we've got, but we've committed to an evolving and dynamic project. So as the needs of the project change, we will ensure that the right people are engaged at the right time. Interesting, when we went out for a consultation on our draft strategy, we had a lot of people from the industry really passionate replying at that end, right, tomorrow we've got to do this project and this project, so there's real energy, but we were very focused that we needed that first period of time to create the framework that was safe, that was robust, and then the next step for us is to re-engage and discover what those projects are to really make the project come alive. So representation, representing the music industry, as we've heard before, we've got the Australasian Performing Rights Association Limited, Australasian Mechanical Copyright Owners Society Limited, and the New Zealand Music Commission and Recorded Music New Zealand. We've also got representation from ATED, from RFA and Auckland Council Arts and Culture at this point in time, but we will change that as and when the needs change. So far, we've developed a tohu. So if you look down that symbol that you've seen down there, hopefully it's instantly recognisable as a reference to music notation, but also has something which is uniquely feels like it's us. It's recognition of Māori culture, of being one of the largest Pacific cities, and is quite a bold statement. And that was developed in consultation through the period, and the naming convention you'll see there is an international naming convention. There are some rules with dealing with UNESCO because it is a multi-language network around the world, and that's how the tohu, the logos get represented. So there's a bit of a structure to why it's labelled that way, but also we wanted something that stood out as being uniquely us. We've developed the strategy, and we've got a website that's in development and ready to go live at the launch, which we'll hear a little bit about in a few moments. We've got steering group terms of reference, which it's a passionate thing to talk about, isn't it? But I know that's council, and we love terms of references and steering groups. So we're working on that at the moment to, again, ensure that we've got the accountability and the communications right. And we've also started international networking events. It's interesting when we look at our youth, which is a huge focus for Auckland, their peers, their networks, the people they're having conversations with now are international. They're not the next suburb over, they're on Facebook groups that are international. We need to learn about what other cities are doing around the world and then see what we can take for our own city and then what is uniquely ours that we can share in terms of our learning to make sure that we're capturing the best lessons learnt, but also retaining what it means to be uniquely Tamaki Makaurau. There's one of our first experiences, which is the Music Cities Convention in Melbourne. That was recently, and we had representation there who knew about this project from ATED, RFA, and indeed the music industry. A little further afield is the 12th UNESCO Creative Cities Network annual meeting in how do I say this? Krakow? Of course, Katowice. And to preempt any questions, we were very, very lucky to receive funding for Mark to attend this from Poland.
That's correct, yeah. So our Polish colleagues offered accommodation over there, and Recorded Music New Zealand picked up the rest of the tab on that one. So that was an excellent opportunity to both get inducted into the network. So there was an orientation meeting that formed part of the first day, which not all cities were involved in. It was just the new cities from the 2017 intake. So that was getting versed in the ways of UNESCO, and then followed on with sub-network meetings and other opportunities to meet face-to-face with people I'd previously only met, on email, and talk about ideas for the future, how we can collaborate, how we can get our artists overseas. We've already hooked up several artists with festivals in Australia, Korea, and Germany.
So the next stage you'll be excited about is a bit of a launch, a bit of a moment in time to celebrate what we've achieved so far and signal the direction that we're heading in the future.
So up to this point, we've been setting that foundations in place so that Auckland can succeed as a city of music. A launch has been planned for mid-November in the lovely Winter Garden of the Civic. And from here on and following the launch, it's about making this work for the sector and the city and its communities.
So I'd like to invite any questions that you've got of us, either of me or any of our agencies present here.
I'll go first, and it's to Mark, Anthony and Victoria. What does that mean to the music industry with Auckland UNESCO City of Music. I'll be interested to find out what that means and how, what the benefits are for the music industry with our 3 people I've just named. So.
I think and I'm speaking from a government agency. The Music Commission is a government agency that is there to support the growth of New Zealand music, socially and economically. And I think it's less about what's it going to do for the industry and more what can music do for our communities, because music's been proven as an enabler of education across the board, of social harmony, of connectedness, and the music industry relies on music being made to turn it into a commercial output. But we have to have the grassroots community in the first place. So I think all of us would agree, it starts with the people in the community. And so if we can grow that, then it has a natural impact on the more commercial side of things.
Okay. Anthony.
I think, Mr. Chair, we've seen already in the short time that the City of Music concept has been in place, a far greater, a more successful collaboration between all the agencies within the industry, certainly in Auckland, but certainly as well with council. And we realise that here in Auckland, it's very difficult to make any progress without that collaboration with council, and that's really what we're seeing. It's a very, very successful project to date. A good example of that is a project that we kicked off a couple of years ago called Song Hub, where we want to create an environment where collaboration, where songwriting can take place. And we've held now, I think, up to 4 song hubs here in Auckland, with the support of council, with the support of all the agencies from within the industry, and we've been bringing very, very successful and talented songwriters from all around the world to Auckland, putting them into an environment where they can create music with our local songwriters. And create music that then has a life and goes on outside and all around the world. I mean, throughout the world, there are only 3 countries who are net exporters of music. That is that they sell more music and they create more music than they consume in their country. It's the US, the UK, and interestingly, Sweden. Stockholm is an absolute hotbed of pop music.
ABBA.
Writing. Oh, ABBA. Oh, is that where they came from?
No, and it all does date back to ABBA.
Jeez, I knew it. I didn't know they came from there.
Why couldn't Auckland be that next hotbed of pop music writing? And that's what we would like to create now. Our next song hub is a Te Reo Māori song hub, where we will take what is unique to us, and we will bring people from overseas to collaborate and to contribute to that songwriting process. And that's very much just a small idea of what the City of Music can deliver.
Mark.
Yeah, so I would agree with both what Ant and Vicky are saying, and then another aspect I get as well is the energising of our music sector. And with the music sector, I include the music fans. They're excited by the possibilities of this as well. Everyone you talk to about this sees the potential in it. And the power for Auckland to become recognised as a music city. You think of, as Ant said, Stockholm, but places like Liverpool as well. Seattle, these cities that you mention the names, and instantly music comes to mind. We're going to be that city as well. Okay. And those music forms, particularly our Polynesian and Maori music, is so unique that you take it anywhere in the world, and everyone takes notice of it. Yeah, the potential for this is hugely invigorating and exciting.
Cool, thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Simpson, and I'll leave, Councillor Clay, then I'll leave you and I to last, Your Worship. Councillor Simpson.
So thank you. I found that really fascinating. As a musician myself, I'm really proud that Auckland has achieved the UNESCO City of Music. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, a couple of comments. I love your logo. I think it's fantastic. I think what I'm looking for is opportunities in the communities of Auckland to understand what they could do to assist. How they. I just don't want us to have a title and do nothing with it. You know, yep, great, not that, tick, and then this time next year, there's nothing to report. What have we done? How have we taken it? How have we promoted ourselves? You know, has it got any tourism function? Has it export, import functions? You know, what have we done about it? So I think what needs now is a bit of a strategy around some KPIs. What are we going to deliver? How are we going to work within this framework? How are we going to sell the message better, benefit from the title, etc. So I encourage you to have some thinking around that. My question, direct question, is one of the slides said that you're going to have a launch mid-November. I'd ask you, have you got a date for that yet? You have?
Mm-hmm.
Please tell me it is not one of the nights of our biggest music festival at the Town Hall, the APPA Music Festival.
It's during the day.
Fantastic. That's all right, because that's in November as well. So I think that's, yeah, I hope that we're available to go. That's the other thing if it's during the day, because often we're not. So look, congratulations, and as I said, let's not just get a title out of this. Let's develop it in something that can benefit our community, our wider communities that make up Auckland, and something that we can all be proud of. So kia ora tātou, thank you.
So through the chair, just to answer the first point, what we see before us up there is not a badge or a stamp, it's a commitment. So part of the application and why we beat other cities is our ongoing commitment to what we are going to do. I think it surprised all of us as we were developing the strategy and listening to the feedback of the various stakeholders, and perhaps terrified us, the breadth of what the music industry actually is and the reach, and you know, it extends to have a flourishing music industry and music sector and community involvement in music. It stretches through to regulatory, it stretches through to how we plan our cities, how we market, all of those things. And if you could think of, I'll just use a couple of random projects. It could be a conversation with our national carriers and about excess baggage for musicians, and is that a barrier to getting people into New Zealand? Do we have the same rules for sports people as we do for musicians? All of those sorts of things, through to how does a musician park out around the CBD of Auckland? Are there loading zones where you can actually get to your performance destination? Is the performance destination, is the performance destination up to scratch? Does it meet regulations in terms of noise and flows and safety at night? So there's a whole lot of things that it's more than just the genre. So we are committed to that. Our next step and our next challenge post launching the strategy is to come up with those very tangible projects. We made a commitment when we got permission to do this, that we would use operational budgets to leverage and build this. So we haven't used anything extra. We've looked at our own cupboards and thought, well, what are we doing? And so a lot of it is just about communication and conversations. But what we will do in the next stage is identify the specific projects and which agencies would like to do them, and there might be some that are purely advocacy things, but there might be some specific projects that we will bring back for future LTPs or work into our existing projects.
So as a result of that, may I have one more follow-up? How often will we hear from you as to what you are doing?
I think I shall answer that with a question. How often would you like to hear us? We can certainly have updates. We'll have a website that will share details, but I think that's a perennial question about us sort of trying to figure out what is the interest of councillors in terms of keeping up with some of these initiatives.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't, you know, I mean, sometimes if you give it a quarterly, it forces you to do something, but then annual, you know, that I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that myself. But I wondered if you'd given it any thinking, and perhaps, Mr. Chairman, through you, we can give some thinking around that and give them some direction.
Very much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I only looked at 6 months. I mean, it's only once a year. That'll give enough time. But
how long do you hold the title for?
The title?
Once you get it given to you.
You largely hold it in perpetuity or for as long as you want. There is a requirement to report back to UNESCO every 4 years on action plans proposed in the first term and how you progress with that, and any new action plans you're putting forward after that period. But unless you are incredibly remiss in your reporting and obligations to UNESCO, I believe the title just carries on as long as you want it to.
So even once base mark on.
Through the chair, that sounds doable. You'll also see threads of this come through in your normal reporting processes, where we will reference, whether it be through council family or council, you'll see references to the UNESCO initiatives. We'll point them out when it's appropriate.
Cool. Councillor Clue.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the November launch as well, but perhaps it's been answered. Yes, it's interesting to see even Fleetwood Mac playing split ends and crowded house songs in each concert now. So anyway, may that last. Are we reaching all the genres? The question is all the genres. I mean, reggae is huge in New Zealand. I think we're the biggest per head importer of reggae music in the world, from what I can remember hearing. But are we reaching right across all the genres? And then what do we do in reaching songwriters and industry outside Auckland? And obviously, we're not going to nab in on Dunedin and trying to take anything from. I know it's literature, but they're a music city. But you know, for the rest of the North Island, you know, are we reaching out to musicians in the industry outside Auckland?
Yeah. So I think from an early stage of this, I've always said that it's music is a gateway for other creative fields as well, not exclusively music, to be part of the UNESCO Creative Cities Network. And it's not Auckland. Auckland is a gateway for other cities as well. So as the largest city in the country and the largest population of musicians and music sector representation, I think we have sort of a duty of care to extend, you know, learnings that we have and networks that we connect with out to the rest of the music sector across the country.
And as far as genre goes, I think we've been very careful in targeting and positioning this whole initiative as broadly as possible. So taking into consideration everything from you know, classical music to all forms of popular music is really important. It's important that everyone's engaged and that everyone's really focused on the City of Music concept.
Because we, you know, I mean, I think the APO have had huge success with their podcasting. I think that's what you call it, podcasting around the world and getting, you know, listeners from amazing places.
Your Worship, the Mayor, and then Matua Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the presentation today. I think, you know, the branding City of Music's a fantastic branding. My questions have been partly asked already, but maybe you could elaborate a bit more on the answers. If you've got a launch event in November, it's really important that we use that to raise the profile of it. And I just wondered what you had in mind in terms of promoting that launch event so that we could popularise the concept a little more than what we've succeeded in doing to date. And then really it is about the ongoing stuff that reaches out beyond just the specific sector or the council to the wider population. What sort of ideas have you got about profile raising in that regard?
Through the chair, I think the launch, we had a long conversation based on the number of people we've engaged with about the size of that. And we realised that in terms of media pickup, we will invite the media, but it'll actually be at a project stage when we have these actions of what we're going to do, specific projects that will really launch those initiatives to the media. The launch is primarily for stakeholders and for developing those networks and relationships. We are strategically having it in the same week as the Vodafone Music Awards. Obviously there's a lot of people involved in around this table who have other obligations that week, so there will be able to capitalise on those other markets. We've already seen the tohu up on the screen at the Silver Scrolls. We'll see that again at events. So I think it'll be quite soft to start with, but as soon as we have a firm action in terms of first off the ranks with developing a project, we'll go quite wide. We are very lucky to have at launch, if you can help me with the name, from...
Our keynote speaker for the launch is a woman called Amy Terrell. She's the Vice President of Music Canada, which is a sister organisation to Recorded Music, in that they represent the recorded music sector for Canada. She's based in Toronto. Amy was the author of a document called Mastering a Music City, which is seen globally as a blueprint for cities to adopt music city strategies. She happened to be coming to, or she's going to Australia at the end of November, so I nabbed her invited her down to the New Zealand Music Awards and asked her to be a keynote speaker at the launch as well. So she'll be there to share her experience and learnings on developing music cities.
In terms of a comms plan, we've just appointed a short-term project manager to develop the launch and also to start working on some of those longer-term projects. And we've had quite a conversation about where our strengths lie, and ATED will actually lead a lot of the comms work, and we're doing a joint comms thing with ATED to develop a plan around that. Thank you.
Oh, Paul.
Could I ask, kia ora, could I ask who in Māori industry it is that the strategy engaged with, and whom provided the tohu that you're referring to? Could I have the composer's descriptive of the tohu?
Through the chair. So the tohu was done with someone who we've worked quite a bit with, Tyrone, who's one of our designers that we used extensively through Matariki over the last few years. We did a multi-agency approach with that. We actually tried what are the values. We did looked at iconography that gets used. Part of the design with that was at an international market level to see how would you place something that was uniquely New Zealand against all those other international logos, and be quite clear. We also looked at its relationship with the other logos used in the music space. So that's going from Twitter to SoundCloud to iTunes and New Zealand Music Month, and we sort of put them all together and say, well, what are the shapes, what are the signs that we can really have them complementary so they look okay next to each other, so they have the prominence, but also that look quite unique and identifiable. That's kind of the process. We do have a supplementary report that we gave to the committee a few months ago about that development, and we're happy to share that again. It's got all the details that I won't be able to remember now. In terms of the engagement, who wants to?
So initially when developing the action plan with the Māori Music Industry Coalition, which is a wide group of people, and during the consultation process on the strategy, that Māori Music Industry Coalition, once again, we also, with Mana Whenua and Ngā Aohao Māori design professionals as well.
We're currently, just additional, we are currently seeking, as I said, we've got an interim steering group, which is quite council heavy, and we've acknowledged that at the moment, and we're wanting to widen that. And we are very conscious of the fact that we would like someone from the Māori music industry to be representative at that steering group. And we're just having talks, interagency talks at the moment about some other appointments that will be made within the sector that we can actually leverage off, but that's still at in a recruitment phase.
I just, if I can follow up with a couple of comments. So the impression of Māori, like in the tohu and in some of the shots, is almost a false impression as well, insofar as it's almost like it's a competition with tourism. You know, why do tourists come here? What is the unique thing that Tāmaki or Aotearoa has? Eh? And you've mentioned it a few times around uniqueness. What is Auckland's? And it ain't science, you know. It really ain't academia. The uniqueness of the bottom rock in the Pacific is it's the bottom rock in the Pacific, full of Pacific people. Can I just say that? And I'm a little bit confused as to why it's all scientific, about the whole world having a look at this thing about how we can be a music city. Music's in our DNA. You know, I don't see this thing as a comprehensive, complex exercise at all, quite frankly. And I'm worried about all of this globalness, about everyone else validating how unique we are, for you to believe it. So I just am glad to hear you're coming back up from the ground up again on the management group to keep us grounded. Can I end by saying that you lost me when the strategy's being launched in the Winter Garden? Because how many Māori go to the Winter Garden? In fact, how many Pacific Islanders go to the Winter Garden? And if that's the starting point, you know, you're really in a deficit position with our communities over, oh no, but it's for you as well, in Otara, in Manurewa, and, you know, so it's a bit of a strong message. Winter Garden.
Got a great fernery.
Well, it's a strong message to the community you're telling me you're committed to engaging with.
Just through the chair, I completely agree. If we were doing a community event, we were wanting to reach the community, I don't think we would choose the Winter Gardens. This is about saying we've got RFA around the table and we've got an offer of coming together. The people coming to the Winter Garden will be those we've already engaged with. So yes, there will be Māori and Pacific artists who are part of our network, who we've had a long conversation with, and they are getting that invitation to come and share. So it is around that. I think we'd take quite a different view if it was a community, hey, come along to a free ticket sort of thing. It's not that. This is closing the loop with our wider sector whānau.
Last but not least, Mr. Chair, her name is Yaka Mishimo, sat on the summit of Rangitoto on the 18th of May of this year. Released a song 6 weeks ago that sat at #1 in Japan, in Japanese, that she composed on that summit in 4 hours. So the world is already here. Looking for the inspiration, they're actually finding in natural landscapes and interacting with New Zealanders, including us Pacific Islanders. So for me, I'm going to measure your enthusiasm, if not over-enthusiasm, because I don't see this as a real tough one, or one that's complex or academic and scientific. Kia ora.
I think through the chair, this is about shining a light on it. This isn't, we're not in deficit at all. We're saying actually the talent and the understanding and the genuine narratives that have been created here are world class and can be shared. And we've got a duty to some of our youth to actually help them on the world stage. But yeah, it's happening here. We're not doing this for international validation. We're putting our headers up and saying, hey, look at this.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to know what kind of engagement or relationship between the APO and the City of Music, and because our council do funding for APO. And my second question is, we talk about music is international, and how about we got a quite diversity city and lots of the Asian people. What kind of your planning or involvement there will be? Thank you.
Through the chair. So we have had engagement with the APO. Like all of our industry sectors, they were invited to respond to the strategy and provide their feedback, which has been worked in. And as we go into the next stage, we'll be having close conversations about those specific projects and where they lie. In terms of the wider diversity thing, we're well aware of how diverse both our population is, but also the genres. Just remember that we're also probably not going to be creating content here. We're going to be enabling. So this is about enabling stuff, not actually creating content. So we've got to understand what is the common barriers or challenges that music groups or education groups or communities actually encounter and address those barriers. So the barrier might be, I don't know how to get a ticket, or I can't get to the venue because of transport options. It's those commonalities across the diverse population that we hope to address, rather than a genre-led one, because we're never going to get the appropriate genre split. But we are aware, and I think we're relying on our industry partners and our established relationships to open doors to some of those communities, because we acknowledge that there's a lot out there that sometimes come from left field that are a surprise. So we are relying on trying to get the message out.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I'd just like to commend everybody involved, and particularly the lead of ATEED. I think that they are well placed to coordinate activities in this space across the organisation, certainly at this stage anyway. And I also commend the involvement of the other council-controlled organisations and the people in council. This is a great project.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. It is a team effort.
So look, I'm going to finish it off if there's no more questions or comments. So look, I again, thank you to everybody involved. Tracy, I see you at the back. And I just want to mihi to you. because I know that you and the staff that are behind everybody in front of us have had a big input in regard to this. I want to acknowledge all the councillors from the previous term and this term to where we are, and you know, to our staff. I mean, look, day in, day out, you continually go out there and push our music and our events. So again to you all, but lastly to His Worship the Mayor, because I think it's your endorsement as well, Your Worship, that obviously talking to our staff in the music industry, that the endorsement from the Mayor is a key one as well. So just want to acknowledge that, so to everybody. So it's been moved and seconded. I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. And I know there's a waiata that you wish to finish off, Richard. Wicked. So, councillors and members of the committee, I'm in your hands in regards to two more items we have. Do you want to plough through?
Go for it.
Then have lunch and then into the governing body workshops?
Yep.
Straight
Let's
after?
do that.
Okay then. Awesome. So look, we'll move on to item 14, natural environment targeted rate. Gail, I think yourself and the team, are they going to come through to support you?
Yes, they are.
So it's been moved and seconded, and I just opened it up for discussion. So, Gail, I'll leave it to you, and thank you for your patience. But it was important for us in the last agenda item that the music industry people sort of did that item before yours. So thank you to you both, and I'll let you introduce the team.
Thank you. Ko Ranganui, ki ronga, tēnā koe. Ko papatua nuku, e tokoto nei, tēnā koe. Kina rangatira, o te komiti, e hui hui nei. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you. Well, I think most people know I'm Gail Ogilvie, the General Manager of Environmental Services, and will also know Phil Brown on my left here, who manages our biosecurity area and has come to join us to provide any more detailed information on kauri dieback. And also, you may not have met Renier Dutoit, who is our financial guy, who can provide us with more information on the dollars if that's needed. So this is actually a milestone event today for us. This is the first of 40 reports that we'll be preparing on the implementation of programs that are funded by the targeted rate. So that's 4 reports per year over a 10-year period. So it's really the start of a journey that was triggered by a decision that was made around this table at the end of June to go ahead with that larger option B investment to try and improve the health of Auckland's natural environment. And I thought that this figure depicts really what's at stake and what we want to avoid. So the programs funded by the Natural Environment Targeted Rate cover 3 key outcome areas to do with controlling our pest plants and animal species across the whole region. So that includes our mainland, our harbours, the Hauraki Gulf Islands and our high priority freshwater lakes. Secondly, to reduce the risk of plant pathogens and in particular kauri dieback. And thirdly, and really importantly, to support the growing action that's being led from the community groups, schools and households across Auckland. Now, you've got a quite detailed report in front of you on progress to date. I'm really pleased. Our objective was to hit the ground running with this investment, and I think as evidenced by some of those projects that are outlined in the report and also the maps that accompany the report that provide a visual depiction of the work we're doing, we've been able to really get some traction in the initial stages of this funding. And I really wanted on that front to acknowledge the staff. You know, it's quite a step up to go from business as usual and ramp up on delivery across a very broad suite of programs. So there's a huge amount of people involved. And the other hallmark of this work, which I'm really pleased with, is it's not just environmental services delivery, it's very much environmental services working across with community services, our parks, colleagues, community facilities, and also colleagues in REMU to deliver the programs. So this just gives you an overview of the breakdown of the spend. Essentially, largely just to point out that although there are a suite of programs being funded, the bulk of the investment sits in 3 key areas, and that's our work on plant pathogens, in particular kauri, the work protecting our parks, and the work supporting community actions. And there are smaller but obviously really important programs across the range of the islands, the region-wide work, freshwater marine biosecurity, and also importantly that enabling tools work, which is providing things like the spatial database that we need to show progress in these areas. Just a very quick deeper dive into a few of the key programs. Kauri dieback. Before the targeted rate decision was made, we were in a situation where we had a very big stretch on our resources, primarily focused in what we were doing in the Waitakere Ranges and to a lesser extent the Hanua. We've been able to accelerate that track upgrade work in the Waitakere Ranges, but we've also, and I think this is important, we've been able to take a more region-wide view, so that's work with our local boards that have healthy stands of kauri and in some cases infected stands of kauri. We've got approximately 4,000 local parks across Auckland, and of those around 400 have kauri stands. So we're, as the first cabs off the rank, working with Kaipātiki, Waiheke and also the Waitakere Ranges local board to determine what work is required to prevent the spread of the disease in those areas. And then underpinning that work is important work around raising awareness so that Aucklanders know how that they can support and reduce the spread of kauri, and also working with the private sector, in particular nurseries. And I think we've touched on earlier with the presentation from the Waitakere local board the important work that's required in terms of controlling and enforcing the closure of some of those tracks. So that's a pretty broadly based program around Kāori. The second program I just want to touch on briefly was working with communities to protect our parks. We're in a position before the targeted rate was approved where we had not only pretty rife weed infestations throughout our parks, but also quite a large reputation risk for council, and that we were asking community groups, a member of the public, to do significant weed control on the properties that they were working on, but weren't walking the talk on our own estate. So this is a big program of work to lift our game across our own regional and local parks and support the community groups that are also working in those areas. And then finally, the third program around the marine environment. One of the projects that's listed in your reports as one of the quick wins over the last 3 months was the launch of the Tukurawa or Waiheke project. So that's quite an ambitious piece of work to eradicate rats and stoats from Waiheke in the next 7 years. We're supporting some of that island pest eradication work with work on marine biosecurity. I think this is going to be really timely in Auckland, leading up to the America's Cup, and making sure that we take that opportunity to showcase what Auckland has on the Hauraki Gulf and work on some of our marine, very invasive marine pests as well, like, for example, the Mediterranean fanworm. In terms of next steps, we will be coming to you, as I said, every quarter with updates on the spend. We've also, over the last few months, been around to talk with all the local boards and provide them a bit of an overview with the proposed spend, and also some information on how we're viewing regional priorities and offering them an opportunity to send us through any projects that they might have in their local board area that meet with those regional priorities. So those regional priorities are things like high biodiversity area, gap in an important corridor, existing community action, and multiple outcomes from the spend. So we will be back in front of you in 3 months' time and happy to answer any questions.
Gentlemen, all done?
Thank
Okay,
you.
Councillor Walker.
Sure, got a few questions, and one is a question that I also put to Healthy Waters, and it just goes to issues around compliance and monitoring. The observation that I've made, and I think fellow councillors on the regulatory committee, is there's woefully insufficient budget in that particular area. And the consequence is that there are environmental misdemeanours happening all across the region because we're not onto it. We don't have sufficient budget that can go to sediment control, can go to removal of scheduled trees, a whole range of things. So I just put to you whether there's some capacity within this budget to support issues around compliance and monitoring. So that's one thing that I'd put up.
So thank you, Councillor Walker. From a Auckland natural environment broad perspective, it's a really good point. We were very careful when we were communicating leading up to the decision what the scope of the spend was. And I don't know if you remember or not, but what we were describing was the investment in pest, animal and pest weed control and the ecological restoration work that we can do being in scope. What was out of scope was any effects on the environment that were a result of our statutory processes, and also the other thing that was out of scope, which is an important area of work that I know we're working on across the council, is the relationship between our urban development and potential impacts on the environment. So those two are obviously linked, but we were really careful when we put this suite of programs forward about what the activity was going to be and what the results were going to be. And there's really not the space
to stretch that at this stage to cover what would be significant additional work with respect to not only the types of conditions that are put on consents, but the way we go about enforcing those.
Well, I understand your response. I think what I would be communicating is that as far as the public are concerned, they're seeing a natural environment targeted rate. They're going to be making the assumption that we're going to be improving things across the board. And what I am suggesting is that there needs to be a joined up approach across council. So as much and all as we've got some budget in this area, there are other areas, for example, the loss of trees across the urban landscape, which is phenomenal. There was a protest by Forest and Bird on, what was it, can't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. We've got massive Pahudakawa trees that are being felled quite legally. And this is happening, and people are seeing it. The other issue that I just bring to your attention that goes to biodiversity is an explosion of some pest plants, particularly gorse, tobacco weed that I see on the northern motorway. It's just out of hand. And that might not be in scope, but as far as the general public are concerned, they would expect it to be in scope because it's what they see. So I just invite your comment on some of those things.
The work on the road corridor, either our road corridor or the national road corridors, are not in scope. To provide some reassuring comment though, we are working closely with those entities because depending on the end finishing point for the Regional Pest Management Plan, which is going through this committee in the next 6 months, the current provisions are for the work that I described we're doing on our own park estate, but also a statutory buffer area of 500 metres around all of those areas that we're working. So that will actually create a legal obligation for any landowners, including central government agencies operating roads and our own roads, of course, plus private landowners, to reach a certain level of weed control in those buffer areas. So that will assist. It won't completely solve the problem, but it will assist. And that broader problem, we are working with those other entities to make sure that they lift their game similar to the way we're doing it.
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
the problem that I'm describing is one where there are substantial areas of land that are being held for speculatory reasons. So the land's not being actively managed from a farming or a husbandry perspective. There's vast areas of it now around the periphery of Auckland just being given over to gorse and various weeds. And the concern that I experience is I see a hillside, and a few years ago there was one gorse plant. Now the whole area is covered in gorse, and it's migrating onto Auckland Transport land, reserve land that's in the vicinity. It's literally out of hand. And that is what is happening around Auckland that people are seeing. It's on private land, and we appear to have abrogated our responsibility requiring landowners to manage these plants, which we can require them to do. But there's a resource attached to that, and we don't appear to be applying that resource. So my question is, are we going to be able to beef up through this rate some of that work?
We're certainly able through this rate to provide information to private landowners on how to protect high-value ecological areas within their land. The question of what we control legally or not is probably something that needs to be discussed as we work through the Regional Pest Management Plan. But just for now, to help with your question, every proposed control in the Regional Pest Management Plan has been through quite a rigorous cost-benefit evaluation. And I know one of the challenges with controlling species by species by species is that it's huge cost to serve. I mean, under the current provisions, what's happening is we've got large numbers of staff going out to address neighbour concerns as to what particular species are taking over the neighbour's property, and asking them to eliminate that. And there's, I think, 1 or 2 or 3 strikes, and then after that third strike, we go in and remove the weed and then charge the landowner. But the problem with that work is huge cost to serve, and secondly, the neighbour 3 or 4 blocks down might not be doing it, so the area is reinfested. So that's why with the Regional Pest Management Plan, which we've discussed with this group, we're taking a site-led approach and looking at areas where we can upgrade weed control rather than species by species by species, because you just don't get the return. I mean, one of the challenges, and this applies to your earlier question, Wayne, with this area is it's a how long is a piece of string. I mean, we're focusing this investment in areas that meet those regionally significant criteria they talked about, and we just can't spread it too thin.
So one of the key things, if it's out of scope, it's out of scope as far as I'm concerned. And don't forget, we ended up going out to our communities in regards to all of the targeted rates and saying, this is what we will spend that targeted rate money on. So, you know, if it's out of scope, it's out of scope, and we just can't do anything about that. Councillor Sayers and then Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Gail and team. So, look, I just want to pick up on something kind of specific. In your presentation, you talked about the volunteers, the Kari dieback, and some reputational risk there. I don't know if you're aware, Gail, today one of your staff have sent me through an email saying they're going to give me more of a brief about what's happening in Rodney specifically, yes, which I'm really looking forward to and appreciate. Thank you. I think that's coming through your team, Phil. Because I really want to champion that in the area, and I've put my hand up to do that. If you could look at something for me today, specifically around your presentation, that's that one of the groups up there that you'll be giving me a bit more brief on have run out of disinfectant for a park that has Kari trees in it. I'm just wondering if you could come back to me later offline and just give me an update of, because they've approached council saying it's with the contractor and the contractor hasn't delivered it. So if we could have a look at that. Do you know which park I'm talking about? Yeah, if you could give me an update today, I'd greatly appreciate it.
We'll do that. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Sayers. We'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's right. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, well done. I suppose my question is around, you know, I understand what you're reporting about, and you're coming up for the second round in February next year. My question is around, this is the extra stuff that we couldn't have done without the targeted rate. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. But of course there are many, well there are certainly some, parts of Auckland that are paying significantly, because it's based on capital value, towards this and are getting theoretically very little benefit. So we knew that because we knew what, as you quite rightly said a few minutes ago. So I think what needs to happen is this needs to be fitted in context to the other work that we are doing as well. Because it may be that the targeted rate goes full tit over here on these things, but actually our normal work program, noting that this is extra that's come in, will actually be able to help your area in here. And actually that money isn't compromised by being drawn away and put over here, which has ended up by being a priority. So I think, you know, I'm very conscious that February next year is February next year, you know, like next year. So let's get the messaging right, both politically and, you know, I'm asking a political question, I suppose, but in essence it's more than that. It's actually about getting the facts right. Yep. And I don't think we see that in the context of just randomly taking the first report. And I suppose my question is to you, Mr. Chair, and to the chair of this committee, Penny, is to look at that in the reporting. You know, it's very easy just to pull it apart and not see it in the big picture. Just reminding us all that the key to this was to bring extra work forward so that we could keep doing the normal things and actually invest more money in the things that were really urgent. And I just don't see how what we're presented with at the moment shows that picture. Well, I'm not seeing it anyway. So it's a challenge perhaps to you and your colleague to actually look at the reporting on the targeted rate stuff and then the work program, maybe one after the other, as far as agenda items, so that you can actually see the whole work program.
I think the challenge is going to be for all of us, ultimately, and that is not only with the targeted rate and where the money is going to be applied, but also with the business as usual. That's going to be incumbent on all of us. But again, when we went out for consultation, they also mentioned around the statutory requirements for us, and it was us to fulfil as a result of the targeted rate, the statutory requirements as well. So, I mean, February, and the best thing is it's been taken on board, because I see Phil's writing everything you've just said, and he's writing it down vigorously. So I think looking forward ahead to February, even though bearing in mind December and January for us is a break, but I know that it's not for the staff. So look, February, I think hopefully something come back around what you've just said.
I mean, I say the same really to Healthy Waters. I mean, it really applies to that as well. It's the how we frame the messaging back, telling Auckland what we've done with the extra money in context of everything else that's happening as well.
And through the chair, if I could just 100% endorse that comment, because I completely agree, Councillor Simpson. I think that is really important. We need to, it's an overall delivery, but when it came up this morning with Healthy Waters, the solution, obviously, as you've described it, is to describe the overall delivery, but compartmentalise that into the extra with the targeted rate. But it's not only doing that in the sense of what we're delivering, but I think the attribution points you've made are really important as well. It's around this table that the decision was made to invest in that money, and I think the attribution needs to follow that as well. So we'll sort that out for the next report.
And it may be equitative, just to follow on, it may be equitative that the work program actually in areas that hasn't got the extra investment is actually higher on business as usual. You know what I mean? So it's about making sure
balancing it.
Cool. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good to see you guys. You've identified the risks as the capacity within the unit, and one of your greatest opportunities opposite that risk is the public out there and the volunteers. So how are you upskilling your unit to maximise the potential of those literally thousands of volunteers out there who just want to help?
So really important part of the program. That's essentially council getting out of the way and supporting community action, because we've seen such a significant increase in that community activity. Our estimate is that about a year ago, when we did the invitations for the first ever inaugural festival, we had about 500 community groups. We've now got upwards of 1,500 community groups in Auckland doing conservation work. So really important that we get out of the way and support that work. And we're supporting it already, but we're able to upscale that with the targeted rate. Things like funding, additional funding, particularly for the week in, week out operational work that's needed. The feedback we get from those community groups is it's okay to get funding if you've got a project with a beginning, middle and end, but it's very difficult to get ongoing operational funding. So additional support for that operational funding, technical advice, materials, governance and health and safety support. But also, beyond those areas that we can support them directly, providing opportunities for better networking so they're more joined up, and also profiling success. We had a couple of weeks ago the inaugural Mayoral Conservation Awards, and that was behind the rationale, obviously, behind that was to celebrate success with those community groups. So really important area in here, and one of the ones that's, top priority.
So are those groups being advocated via the local board to your teams, or the teams know them all?
Yeah, we've actually now for the first time got maps of all of the local board areas and the community groups that are operating in each of those local board areas.
Excellent.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
So item 16, I'll move item 16.
Second.
And second, councillor Simpson. No questions, no comments. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. I then move the exclusion of the public, and it's all up there somewhere for the reasons why we're excluding the public. In 5 seconds. 4, 3,